Good morning. We'll go ahead and get started this morning. Thank you. My name is Dr. Sandra McKay, and I am the Huffington Fellow here at the Baker Institute for Public Policy. I'd like to welcome you all here to our symposium, Kids on the Move, Enhancing Active Transportation Safety for Children, sponsored by our Child Health Policy Program. It is a privilege to address you today as we embark on a mission to cultivate a culture of safety and active transportation for our children in the Houston region. Today, we have assembled leading experts, policymakers, advocates, and committed citizens to shed light on this pressing issue and pave the way towards safer streets and healthier communities. Before we delve into our discussions, there are a few logistical matters to address. Please take a moment to set your mobile devices to silent mode as a gesture of courtesy to our speakers and fellow attendees. We will be actively encouraging questions from our audience throughout the event, which can be submitted using question cards at your tables. Kindly place your questions in the center of your table, and our team will be around promptly to collect them for consideration. Lastly, this event is eligible for 3 certificate maintenance credits from the American Planning Association, reflecting our shared commitment to fostering informed discourse and driving positive outcomes in urban planning and public health. We are at a critical juncture in addressing child physical and mental health. In 1969, nearly 50% of our young people embraced walking or biking to school. Today, that figure has plummeted to just over 10%. This decline in active transportation comes at a time when the American Academy of Pediatrics has declared a child and adolescent mental health crisis. Coupled with an alarming rise in childhood obesity, the imperative to act becomes clear. Physical activity, such as walking and biking, not only combats sedentarism, but fosters mental health, thus helping to address the dual epidemic of loneliness and obesity. However, in the Houston area, often the risk of transportation injury can be high, leading parents to think twice about getting their kids out of cars. In the Houston Chronicle's Out of Control series, published in 2019, Houston was reported as having the highest deaths per capita of the 12 largest American metros. Our conference will begin with a presentation by my colleague, Dr. Zoabe Hafeez. Dr. Hafeez is a non-resident fellow at the Center for Health and Biosciences and an associate professor of pediatrics at McGovern Medical School at UTHealth Houston, where he practices pediatric hospital medicine. He will begin our day with a discussion of child active transportation hotspots within the Houston city limits and offer potential tool created specifically for the Houston area to combat these combined trends in increasing obesity, worsening mental health, and high local transportation injury rates. Let us unite in our collective endeavor to create safer streets, healthier communities, and brighter futures for the children of our region. Together, we can affect meaningful change. Thank you.
Hey, good morning, y'all. So thanks everyone for coming. I think we're gonna have a great day today. Let's just make sure I can drive. So we're going to talk a little bit, just very briefly, we'll have a conversation about 3 things, and then we'll get our day started with Commissioner Garcia and get on to our panels, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun today. But before we do all of that, I just wanted to talk about 3 things. One was talk a little bit about what Dr. McKay just mentioned, this generational shift away from kids walking and biking to school and walking and biking other places. Then we're going to talk about what we here at Baker have created, essentially a heat map of where these injuries are occurring specifically in the Houston area, because believe it or not, all neighborhoods aren't created equally. And then finally, we'll talk about what we can do about it. Again, a Baker Institute tool that we can utilize to actually start to address the issue and make the Houston region a better place. So before we get into that, we'll talk about some definitions. The title of this whole day is centered around this idea of active transportation. So what's active transportation? Very simply, any movement through physical activity is active transportation. Vast majority of kids in the Houston area and other places, that's either walking or biking. So if you hear active transportation and you think walking or biking, that's reasonable. A few years ago, I was in Montrose and I saw this guy with like a longboard with wheels on it, and he had a big old stick and was just like rowing down Westheimer. That's also active transportation. However, the prevalence of that is pretty low in Houston. Maybe he's still out there and maybe he's got followers, so maybe it's getting higher. Then there's hotspot. A hotspot, if you guys just think about a hotspot of where a lot of events are occurring, that's good enough. So a hotspot, if you remember those COVID maps and Montgomery County is a hotspot or Harris County is a hotspot, there's more events occurring there than should be occurring randomly. That's all you got to remember, and then we'll be good to go. So as Dr. McKay mentioned, this has been an ongoing problem. It didn't happen yesterday. It's been gradually occurring for years. The first data set that I'm aware of was this 1969 data set that showed half of kids would walk or bike to school. Now it's 10%. There's some local level data more recently that might show it's even under 10% of kids either walk or bike to elementary schools in the United States. So why is this important? Well, again, Dr. McKay mentioned this, but the American Academy of Pediatrics recently declared a public health emergency. They are not making that up, in my opinion. I'm a pediatric hospital medicine physician, which means that in my day job, I'm over at Memorial Hermann, and I take care of ill and critically ill kids. I see that Dr. Smith, my boss, is here, and she's doing a lot of great work on this problem. And this problem effectively is, say, 10 years ago, when I was starting out, I was a resident, I would probably see maybe one preteen suicide attempt a year. Now I see one every other month, every month. And it's not going away since COVID. It's real, it's here, and it's been ongoing. It's not just COVID. It's probably been going on gradually since this 1969 data set. It's a similar trend that's occurring. That leads me to my next point, which is this article that came out last year in Journal of Pediatrics. Peter Gray and some co-authors essentially are saying, look, over the same timeline, 50 years or so, we've been seeing a decrease in something called independent activity, which is essentially the ability for a kid to play, roam, travel, engage in other activities, go to school by themselves, come back by themselves, stop off at their friend's house on their own without any adult oversight or control. That's independent activity. That's been decreasing over a long period of time. And he's saying, y'all, I don't think it's a coincidence that we're seeing a mental health crisis occurring as we're seeing a decrease in independent play. Not only is it a contributing factor, but this article, and I think, I'll give you my editorial, I think he's right. He thinks it's a major contributor to this phenomenon. So, and this decrease in independent play probably correlates with anxiety, depression, sense of self-agency, and a decreased resilience, even into young adulthood. A lot of young adults are saying, hey, whenever we're presented with new diversity, a lot of new ideas, a lot of stimuli, it makes us anxious and it creates mental health issues. So this is probably not something that's just going to end at 18. This is going to be long-term for the United States and our community. And then we have our third problem. This is more of a local level problem. This, I'm sure a lot of y'all know this article that came out in 2019. It's actually a series of articles that the Houston Chronicle put out called Out of Control. And essentially the thesis of it was that Houston roads and drivers are amongst the most deadly in the nation. We're number one in impaired drivers, impaired driver fatalities. And we're at the top of a pack of a lot of other phenomenon. And I think a lot of parents know this, intuitively or not. They know that, hey, look, it's not a safe environment necessarily compared to maybe some other places and some other times. So what are we doing at Baker? Well, the first thing we thought was, why don't we figure out what's actually going on? We have this hypothesis that not all places are created equal in the Houston region. And we also had a hypothesis that no one's going to do this if Houstonians don't do this. If Houston area residents don't start addressing the issue, start getting good data, no one else is going to do it for us. So why not? Let's just do it. So the first thing we did was we went on to TxDOT's CRIS website. TxDOT does a great job of getting crash data from law enforcement, and it's publicly available. And we found that between 2018 and the end of 2023, there were over 600 incidents of child injuries. These are child active transportation injuries. About a third were serious or fatal. About 3/4 were pedestrian, about a quarter were bicyclists, and about a third were less preteens, kids 12 and under. Why is that important? Well, I think there is an accurate assumption that the older you get, older kids are more likely to be injured by motor vehicle drivers than younger kids. However, the number of young kids is not insignificant. It's a ton. It's a ton. So the other thing I wanted to mention before I move on is this 600 is not just a number, it's also a symbol. Intuitively or not, parents know when a child gets injured by a motor vehicle driver in their neighborhood. And that's a signal to them that their 6-year-old should not be going outside, should not be walking or biking to school, should be staying inside and shouldn't be playing with their friends on the street. And when Jimmy wants your kid to come over, maybe I'll drive him over even though it's 2 blocks away, instead of letting him have that independent activity of walking over, getting lost, and having a good time through his neighborhood, and feeling like his neighborhood is his home. All right, and this is what we found. So just some orientation, and hopefully we'll see if I can do this. I am not able to do this. So I wanted to get my mouse up there, and I don't think I'll be able to do it. That's okay. Okay, so real quick, if you look, oh, thank you. And I point it right up there? Or point it up there? Okay, I can do that. Thank you. All right, so if I lose my voice because I'm not in the microphone, let me know. So this is downtown Houston, right? This is the Loop, this is the Beltway. And what you're essentially looking at is every single dot is an incident. The dark gray is Houston city limits. This is a Houston city limits study. And the light red sort of hexes, those are hotspots, statistically significant hotspots. The dark red are, I don't know what you want to call them. We'll call them super hotspots. Those are the ultra significant places. Those are the hotspots of the hotspots. So what I love about I'm gonna ramble a little bit here, so please allow me to. What I love about hotspot maps and things like this is everyone here that's looking at it is getting their own story out of this map, which I think is real cool. I think most of y'all are from Houston area, or you know the Houston region well, and y'all are probably looking at where you grew up, where you live now, where your kid goes to school, that one street that you drive down or bike down that you're like, man, I bet that's a crazy street, you know? And so there's a lot of stories that can be unpacked from just this one image, which I think is awesome. The stories that I unpacked are just a handful, and I'm kind of giving it away by showing you those. If you can see those circles, those light yellow circles, those are the stories that we unpacked. A couple of things that really stood out is this. So this is 59 going southbound towards Sugar Land. That's the Hardy Tollway. I'm not getting it. That's the Hardy Tollway. So that wedge created by those two highways, West Park Tollway, thank you. Those two highways that are creating that little triangle are essentially creating a contiguous ultra hotspot of child injuries. That's where a whole bunch of them are being concentrated. If y'all know Little India, then Chinatown, then A-Leaf, that's what I'm talking about. The other one that I'll also mention is right here, this is Sunnyside. If y'all know anything about Houston history, especially the last 30, 40 years, Sunnyside's a very culturally significant place for us. And it's also a hotspot that I'll be talking about a little bit. All right. So first we'll go to this A-Leaf area. And we're going to zoom in. This is Beechnut near Willcrest. A-Leaf is a very culturally diverse neighborhood that's right outside. Actually, I'm not sure how I'm doing on time, so please let me know. All right. A-Leaf is a very culturally significant hotspot. A culturally significant place and also a hotspot. This is Beechnut near Willcrest, just outside the Beltway, right along, just north of 59, if y'all know what I'm talking about. And there's a couple of things that stood out. This is a zoomed in map of that intersection. There's a few things to think about, or a few things I wanted to talk about. One is these sort of red, yellow, green dots. The red dots are fatal injuries. The yellow dots are serious injuries, and the green dots are minor injuries. I'm just going to do my second soapbox, and I think this will be my last soapbox. When it comes to an individual level, I do care a lot if something was serious or minor. It matters a lot. However, when you're talking about population health, it's actually not that important. The reason why is, and I think any EMS person will tell you, any doctor will tell you, the difference between a minor and a serious or fatal injury in a kid is grace of God. Head falls slightly differently, the car comes at a slightly different angle, the car's front end is slightly higher, 5 more miles an hour faster, whatever it is. That goes from minor or no injury to serious or fatal. So that being said, you guys can see that there's 2 serious injuries right here. One was a 15-year-old girl walking in the morning, head-on collision with an F-150 driver, and the other one was a 13-year-old boy, early evening, I think 6 or 7 p.m., also a head-on collision, within a block of each other. And this is that block. And there's a couple of things that stood out to me about this particular block. This is Beechnut facing west towards Willcrest. A couple of things that stood out. One is that it's 3 lanes each way. I know, I've driven on roads like this. I know what the speed limit is. I guarantee you spend 5 minutes on the road, somebody's going 60, somebody's going 50. There's always one person who thinks that they can weave through traffic and get to that light slightly faster. I'm not going to say anything about that. And then the other thing I'll say is that there's some commercial driveways here, and those commercial driveways are older, and I believe that there's one right there. There's one right there, and I've been on those commercial driveways. You can fly right out of them and get right onto the street. So if you're driving on the street, you're thinking about the cars next to you. You're thinking about that one guy coming up behind you who's going way too fast, and you're thinking about the motor vehicle driver who's coming out of the commercial driveway. You're not. Oh, that's stuck. You're not thinking about the 4'8" kid right here. You know what I mean? And so that's how a lot of these injuries happen. The other thing that stood out to me is that this is not actually a unique street. There's a bunch of these all over the Houston area. This one just happens to be a hotspot. The second one I want to talk about is Sunnyside. Sunnyside's a little bit different. I call it the Sunnyside Square Mile because there's 4 schools. This is Young Elementary, this is Bastion Elementary, Grimes Elementary, and Worthing. Worthing High School. And those 4 make up effectively an approximate square mile. And what was unique about this square mile, A, is that within the square mile there's an unusual amount of kids getting hit by motor vehicles. But B, there's a huge diversity in the types of injuries that you're seeing. Right by Young Elementary, on the top left of your screen, those are 2 injuries that occurred to kids one was 4 years old and one was 1-year-old. The 1-year-old was part of I don't know what this driver was doing, but it was a Ford Expedition driver who just went over a 34-year-old woman, a 4-year-old, and a 1-year-old all in one go, and the 1-year-old got injured. And the other one was a 4-year-old. But you see that there's some of these injuries are occurring on small streets. Some of these injuries are occurring on big streets. That's Belfort on the north side. That's Reed on the south side. Those are more fast-moving streets. A lot of them are not occurring on intersections. And I'll tell you, the younger a child gets, the more likely they are to be involved in a non-intersection conflict. And some of them are at intersections. There was one child who got killed right outside of Grimes Elementary. It's just, there's not one intersection. There's not one place. So this speaks to a little bit of what makes Sunnyside also not unique. It's a predominantly African-American neighborhood, and it's predominantly, and neighborhoods like Sunnyside, and I believe this is true of Sunnyside, having driven through it a bunch of times, they're historically underinvested in, meaning a lot of times they don't get the upgrades that other neighborhoods would get. Impaired drivers tend to be present in a higher proportion in neighborhoods like these. Not sure why, but part of it might be liquor store prevalence. Neighborhoods like Sunnyside tend to have higher concentrations of liquor stores, which is associated with a higher concentration of impaired driving. I'll tell you right now, as you already know, Houston is a great place if you want to come into conflict with an impaired driver, you're in the right town. And so, and Sunnyside may or may not be a hotspot there. So there's a lot of opportunities for program with these schools, safe pedestrianism, safe bicycling, programming with drivers, and maybe even talking to some of these neighborhood advocates and saying, I have a hypothesis in some of these neighborhoods, maybe not Sunnyside, but that there might be some super drivers that are a small proportion of drivers are causing a disproportionate amount of harm. And so if you really just get a handful of drivers off the road, you can significantly make a neighborhood more safe. Those are all hypotheses, not specific to Sunnyside, but have worked in other neighborhoods. So this leads us to our last point. We need good data. And like I said, I don't know, and this is why it's so important. If you don't have good data, you run the risk of being influenced by the loudest voice. In medicine, we have this concept called triaging, which is the first child who shows up to your emergency room has the sniffles. The second child is dying because they're in the midst of an asthma attack. It doesn't matter that the kid with the sniffles showed up first. We're going to see the child with the asthma attack first. But if you don't have holistic data, you really can't do that when it comes to geospace, when it comes to large places like cities, neighborhoods, communities, counties. So things like this hotspot can help you find the stories that are the most compelling before. And so it allows you to triage essentially the neighborhoods accurately. And the second thing is once you figure out where the hotspots are, then you can start going to schools and start getting school-based data. And so what does that mean? That means effectively, so I'll talk a little bit about this idea that came out of Austin, led by a team, essentially a team led by Deanna Holscher, Dr. Holscher from the Dell Center for Healthy Living, which is a great organization and has great leadership. And they came up with this idea called the TCOP, School Environmental Audit Tool, which essentially looks at schools to assess their safety and walkability. And this score was validated in Austin, validated in Seattle, and we took that score and essentially tried to come up with a Houston-specific score using the City of Houston's user guide for walkable places, as well as the National Association of City Transportation Officials, which has had historically good representation from Houston area people and their urban street design guide. And we came up with this. So this is something that we've developed that is intended for the Houston area. It's a school-specific walk score. And by walk score, I mean like an active transportation score. So this is sort of a zoomed-in version of the different metrics. And what we essentially did is we took the TCOP validated metrics and infused some of what the City of Houston and NACDO are doing to essentially come up with 3 large categories. One is active transportation infrastructure. What does that mean? Effectively, sidewalks and crosswalks around the school. The second is traffic characteristics. What does that mean? Well, is your elementary school on a slow-moving one lane or 2-lane street, or is it next to a Strode, a really fast-moving road that's 3 lanes each way, that has a non-school speed limit of like 35, 40 miles an hour? And then finally, we talk about school architecture. School architecture essentially is how welcoming is that school to a child walking to it. Is it close to the street or is it way far back off the street? Your second grader, do they need to walk around an idling suburban, or do they have their own little entryway that's shaded that they can go straight into the front of the school and don't have to worry about the car pickup lane? So little things like that can actually dictate whether a mom or a dad makes a rational choice of saying, little Jimmy's not walking to school, or absolutely little Jimmy can walk to school. And then as you can see, like we have final scores for every single school, and we also have sub-scores. And the idea behind that is we feel like that this can empower stakeholders and can empower advocates and neighborhood folks to essentially say, whenever the opportunity comes, whether it's for infrastructure redesign, programming at a school, we already know which school is performing well and which school is not. And we already know which school needs the infrastructure and which school doesn't. And so finally, I'll talk a little bit about what has worked. This is a great City of Houston public-private partnership that led to a big improvement in a hotspot that was identified both by us and City of Houston's high injury network. And this is Hillcroft near Bel Air. It looked like a typical, this is Gulfton, if y'all know the Gulfton neighborhood off 59. So it looks like a typical Houston fast-moving road, but this is a very dense neighborhood, a very culturally diverse neighborhood, a high immigrant population, and a lot of child pedestrian and bicyclists. And they took this is what these two intersections looked like before, and this is what it looked like after. And it was, in my opinion, great work. They widened the sidewalks, implemented shared use bikeways, improved intersections for pedestrian access, improved bus stop access, and reduced the motor vehicle lanes from 8 to 6. I've driven on it. It actually even feels better as a driver, because all of a sudden you don't have the pedestrian coming out of nowhere. Everything is very expected, and you don't go as fast, but you're driving smoothly, if that makes sense. They found that the speeds decreased from about 30 to 35 to 20 or under, right around the intersections when these drivers are interacting with pedestrians and bicyclists. And I will say that the pedestrians and bicyclists are actually moving faster after the implementation. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about all of this stuff today. The first panel, moderated by Dr. Mary Aiken, will be about health benefits of active transportation. Our second panel will be about infrastructure solutions with some great speakers as well. I'll be moderating that. And the last panel will be about legislative opportunities and policy options, moderated by Dr. McKay. So I think we're gonna have a great day. I think before that, we'll have Adrian Garcia, our commissioner, who will be giving our keynote. Commissioner Garcia we're actually very honored to have him today. I've been a big fan of his work for a while now. So Commissioner Garcia was born and raised in Houston's Northside neighborhood and has always called Harris County Precinct 2 his home. He was first elected as Commissioner of Precinct 2 in 2018 and is now serving his second term. Commissioner Garcia has dedicated his entire career to public service and safety, first as a police officer for over 2 decades, then as a council member and as Harris County Sheriff. In his role, Commissioner Garcia advocated for the needs of 1.3 million residents living in Precinct 2. Under his leadership, Precinct 2 has garnered multiple local and national awards for its innovative and community-focused approaches to problems such as health disparities, workforce and small business concerns, flooding, and public safety. Amongst other accomplishments, James Driver Park is the first fully inclusive park, regardless of age or ability, in all of Harris County. And I'll say personally, I'm a great fan of the work he's done with that park. Additionally, his Revive to Thrive initiative focuses on revitalizing the precinct through strategic infrastructure and economic investments. So please join me in welcoming Commissioner Garcia.
Good morning, and thank you for that very kind introduction. And I hope you guys will glean a great deal of information from the conversation. I hope to contribute just a little bit to the thought process. But with that being said, bless you. With that being said, let me just recognize a few folks that make my life very easier and easier. Well, 2 of them in particular, 1 of them not so much. The ones that make my life easier is Jorge Bustamante, and was making my life easier is Doug Peterson. The one that gives me a little frustration every now and then is, no, I just kid. I always like to give this guy heartburn. Scott Spiegel, my press secretary. We try to be a family in the precinct, and so I always like to invoke on the effort of embarrassment. But with that being said, Dr. Sandburn, good to see you as well. I should have known you would be here. I am just grateful for your presence and participation, and I'm honored to be invited to come and share a few remarks, and I hope that I can bring some value to today's discussion. Because what lies at the heart of our communities, the safety of our children as they navigate our streets. And as it was mentioned, I'm the Commissioner of Precinct 2, which is the east side of Harris County. And it is amongst one of the most underserved areas in all of Harris County. I often tell people that the reason I interviewed for this job is because it has the lowest median income of all of Harris County. It has the lowest educational attainment rate at the high school, post-high school level. It has the highest number of children and families without health insurance. I own the mortality rate by 20 years. And if that's all not bad enough, we have the lowest homeownership rate, so more people live or rent where they live rather than own. And we also have the highest rates of cancer in some areas of my precinct, not in the county, but in the state. So a lot of motivation to do some good work. So with that being said, and as it was mentioned, for me, active transportation is at the heart of Revive to Thrive, and Revive to Thrive is essentially revitalizing neighborhoods through strategic investments in those, so that it's not just unfettered gentrification that is the sole contributor to progress in those respective neighborhoods. I want people who have been advocating for the improvements in their communities to reap the benefits of that advocacy while they can still enjoy them and not have gentrification be the reason they have to move out of the communities. And so with that, my journey in working towards active transportation safety stems from a pivotal moment during my time on Houston City Council. And I remember Mayor Bill White, his theme for running for mayor was get Houston moving. And downtown Houston, as it is a little bit today, was a gridlock place at about this time of the morning and about later on this afternoon, because everybody comes to downtown Houston almost at the same time. So he convened downtown CEOs with the goal of getting them to shift their work schedules for their respective employees. And so my question was, you're probably not going to achieve that, Mayor, so why not install bike racks strategically throughout downtown Houston, and ask the CEOs to, rather than shift their work schedules, why don't you allow for flexibility in work attire? Why don't you buy them memberships at the downtown Y so they can shower, or give them access to showers within your respective facilities? So for me, the concept of commuter biking, rather, was not a novel idea. So, but as you look at that and you think about that, like Jorge, I try to bike as often as I can. In fact, if I'd gotten up a little earlier today, I'd have biked here. But our sprawl is a particular challenge for all of Houston and all of Harris County. Making active transportation development difficult, or rather the use of and practice of active transportation dangerous and difficult. The spread out nature of our communities contributes to an overwhelming reliance on single occupancy vehicles. However, this reality only serves to underscore the urgency of our collective mission to transform our existing infrastructure into one that is conducive to safe, accessible, active transportation, particularly for our children. This mission is deeply intertwined with the principles of Vision Zero, where the pursuit of traffic safety is unequivocally intertwined with public safety. I'm sure I don't need to define Vision Zero for this particular audience, but the idea that there should be 0 deaths and 0 serious injuries on our streets, once viewed as a pie-in-the-sky idea, is not debatable anymore. It is the baseline from which we make all decisions, and I'm hopeful that this work will result in what I have seen in places like Amsterdam. I don't know if any of you have had the chance to visit. But in Amsterdam, I was just really impressed with the fact that as you're walking by residents, you can see outside their homes and see the intergenerational commitment to biking that they have. You can see the bikes with training wheels, the cruiser with a grocery basket, and the road bike for the person going to work in downtown. So with that, before I get into some of the work that we're doing in the precinct and across Harris County, I want to share a story in a part of the precinct that I acquired through redistricting, the western portion of Aldine. An 11-year-old boy was crossing the street in the evening. He and his family were celebrating his mother's birthday that night, back in November of 2021. The boy's name, Raul. The street he was crossing, West Gulf Bank at Airline. Raul was trying to cross the street that had no crosswalks. In fact, there weren't even sidewalks. It was about 7 o'clock in the evening during the fall, so it was already dark outside. The road he was crossing had no street lights. On one side of the busy street, a drainage ditch, more like a moat, that runs parallel to traffic. On the other side, the road leads directly into some people's homes and driveways. Raul was sent by his family across the street to his aunt's house to get a speaker to bring back to the party. That's when a speeding F-150 came cruising down West Gulf Bank, and you can guess what happened. He hit Raul and sent him flying into a ditch, face down. Luckily, he survived, but that F-150 sped away. Raul suffered, numerous broken bones. His family obviously is grateful that he was able to recover from his months and months and months of rehabilitation and care. But that incident was preventable. Any number of measures could have kept this from ever happening. For too often in Harris County, though, the powers to be didn't focus on pedestrian safety, and particularly in the poorer parts of the county like Precinct 2. A street like West Gulf Bank would never be built that way today. And so the lack of a sidewalk, crosswalk, or street lighting would never be acceptable under today's standards and requirements. But that's what I inherited in Precinct 2. There are around 1,000 miles of roads in Precinct 2, many of which were built without safety in mind at all. I'm going to talk about increasing the availability of bike paths, but in the case of West Gulf Bank, just the mere presence of a sidewalk would dramatically improve safety. It's hard enough to bike on grass, much less in a ditch, and that obviously isn't feasible or acceptable. Today, Harris County takes a new approach on our roadways. We build them with pedestrians like Raul in mind. We have hundreds upon hundreds of existing roadways that need to be updated. But I'm very, very proud to share that today, work is underway to install sidewalks, street lighting, and other safety measures to West Gulf Bank, so that the next time Raul or one of his siblings needs to run across the street to grab something from his aunt's house, they can do it safely. From the time that I was given the opportunity to serve as commissioner, we started our strategic plan initiatives, including community plans in unincorporated Precinct 2, but also active transportation plans such as the East End Bike Plan, the Bay Area Ped Bike Plan. Doug's very happy about that one. Which all outline the comprehensive strategies for expanding walking and biking infrastructure. I'm especially excited about the Bay Area Ped Bike Plan because it gets us closer to developing what we're calling the 40-mile loop. It will connect our key parks, including Sylvan Beach Park, Partnership Park, Clear Lake Park, Bay Area Park, and it will be the spine of the Bay Area Bike Network. I could list many more projects that we're working on to make active transportation better, from our Carpenter's Bayou Trail, Juneteenth Park Trail, that have improved recreational opportunities, to our upcoming Quitman Street and Navigation Boulevard partnership projects. Randy, I know Randy's advocating for that. These projects that are going to retrofit inner city streets and will be key corridors for schools, transit, and bayou trails. Or even our Coa Street project, which will be the first Envision verified project that allows kids to walk, bike, or roll to James Driver Park, my inclusive park. I'm very proud of that, and thank you, Zoabe, for recognizing it. It's a flagship park designed for kids and adults of all abilities. But what I really want to emphasize is that just putting down concrete is absolutely not enough. We must look at how people, especially children, experience these public spaces and urban design strategies we can implement to make them safe and healthy, comfortable, convenient, inspirational, and educational. We recently led the way for allocating county ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act funds, targeted on the most underserved communities, and we're using them, not just for sidewalks and trails, but for streetlights, pedestrian scale solar lights, trees, and landscaping, most of all for civic art to enhance the sense of place, civic pride, and visual appeal of our streets. And God knows we need more trees along our bike trails for our summer walks and rides, right? So what would a safe bike community look like? To me, it invokes a scene from Leave It to Beaver. I hate to say it, but some of you in this room are too young to know who Beaver was. Nonetheless, younger kids playing and learning on their street, older kids exploring independent mobility, feeling comfortable walking, biking, or taking the bus to any destination. Parents having the peace of mind that their kids will come home safe, vibrant public spaces full of kids of all ages breathing clean air with minimal stress. Make no mistake, we're going to get there, but there is a long road ahead. Bad joke, right? Nonetheless, there will be a lot of pieces that will need to fall into place. A key milestone was the adoption of the Harris County Vision Zero Action Plan in 2022. The sobering statistics presented in the plan indicate, get this, an average of 430 fatal crashes, 2,278 crashes resulting in serious injuries annually in Harris County. This means that someone dies in a traffic crash nearly every single day, and at least 6 people are severely injured. Absolutely unacceptable. However, despite the undeniable imperative to prioritize safety, there are still those who think anti-car activists are out to take our cars. It is imperative that we address those misunderstandings and engage in constructive dialogue to pave the way for meaningful change. Our path towards achieving a safer and more inclusive biking community is clear, but challenging. Events like today's keynote serve as a catalyst for changing the narrative surrounding active transportation. I especially want to thank the Baker Institute and Zoabe for organizing this event and continuing the discussion. It is imperative that we continue discussions on how our infrastructure is a reflection of our commitment to equity, physical and mental health, and sustainability. It allows kids to ride to school, workers to affordably ride to work, families to ride together on their way to go play together at a park. To get there, we are actively learning from other cities, other counties, and yes, even other countries who have gotten it right. I'll be attending the National Association of City Transportation Officials Conference later this year, and I'm especially looking forward to adopting any lessons learned that deal with resolving NIMBYism. That is very real in Houston today, by the way. I'm proud that today we are actively investing in Vision Zero initiatives at unprecedented levels, leveraging both local and federal resources. And for those who may not know, Vision Zero was first implemented in the 1990s in Sweden and has been successful throughout parts of Europe. And now, as you're hearing, it's gaining momentum and popularity here in the United States. Programs like the Reimagined Corridor Studies program exemplify our bottom-up approach to street design, prioritizing extensive community engagement to address concerns and build consensus on visionary street designs. In conclusion, the safety of our children while they navigate our streets is a non-negotiable priority. You have my unwavering commitment that we're going to continue enhancing active transportation safety, but our work is far from over, and it is incumbent that each and every one of us, and you especially in this room, that you continue your efforts and participation in this endeavor, whether through advocacy, community engagement, or support for key initiatives. Because when you do that together, we will be able to create a future where every child can move freely, confidently, and above all, safely. Thank y'all for having me. Appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Thank you so much. That was incredibly moving. We are going to take a 5-minute break, let you guys stretch your legs a little bit, and also allow the opportunity for a little bit of networking, grab a little bit of breakfast before we move on to our first panel.
Great. So for this first panel, and we're going to have 3 wonderful panels of experts, and we want to hear their thoughts and also to get your engagement during these sessions. So I am very excited about this. My name is Mary Aiken. I am a pediatrician. I'm the chair of the Department of Pediatrics at Montgomery Medical School, UTHealth, and my personal interest is in injury and violence prevention. So I've been excited to hear the focus on injury prevention thus far. But this session is focusing on not just the safety aspects and injury prevention, but the broader health impacts of active transportation and its implications for our children. We have 2 panelists today that I've been very pleased to meet for the first time in person, Dr. Deborah Salvo and Dr. Bob Sanborn. I think many of you may know him. Dr. Salvo is a physical activity and public health scientist based at UT Austin. And she does extensive research on the role of physical activity and its impact on health and health disparities, both here in the United States and around the world. Her long-term goal is to produce contextually relevant evidence for reducing spatial health disparities, like we've been talking about this morning, and to improve the built environment that will enable physically active, healthy, and sustainable living. Her work does take place both in the U.S. and internationally. She's an active member of multiple multinational research teams that are developing and applying state-of-the-art techniques to study this problem and understand it better. And some of these include the Our Voice Global Network Project, the Global Observatory for Physical Activity, and the Global Observatory for Healthy and Sustainable Cities. And she's the co-director of that organization. And she has been funded by the NIH and multiple other agencies to do her work. She is finishing a study right now, and I think she'll talk about that, on the impact of safe routes to school, which is one of the interventions that is particularly relevant to us today. Prior to joining UT Austin, Dr. Salvo held academic appointments at Wash U and St. Louis, here at UTHealth Houston in the School of Public Health, and at Stanford. She is originally from Mexico City and got her bachelor's degree there, and then her PhD from Emory University. And then Dr. Bob Sanborn is the CEO and president of Children at Risk, a leading advocacy organization for children. And as the leader, he is a well-known advocate and activist for children's health and well-being in general. He has extended the organization's reach during his leadership, not just here in Houston, but across the state to Dallas and Fort Worth. He has established a public health and policy law center, a research institute, and a center for parenting and family well-being, amongst other things. And the focus for children at risk is quite broad and includes a variety of risk factors for children, including a focus on trafficking and exploitation of children. He is the executive editor of 2 peer-reviewed open access academic journals, and he may be best known as the host of Growing Up in America, a popular radio program on Pacifica Radio Network. So please welcome both of these experts. We're very glad to have you here this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you. So as we've considered this issue of active transportation this morning, again, the focus has been a lot on the safety aspect, which is clearly very important. But in my 25 years as a pediatrician, I've watched obesity go from something relatively unusual to something that affects 1 in 3 children. Watched asthma get worse, watched mental health get worse, and so this has a broader impact. Perhaps you could each comment on what you think the full health implications are in the context of this topic.
All right, so I guess I'll start. Well, first of all, thank you all for having me here today. Yes, in terms of the greater impacts of active transportation with children and across the lifespan, we have a lot of evidence of benefits for this. I'm a physical activity epidemiologist, so I'll start with that. We know that the domains within which you can get your necessary levels of physical activity to maintain your health, to not have your low levels of activity become a problem or a risk factor for chronic disease later in life. There's different ways in which you can get that. We call those domains. One of the key domains is active transportation. In public health, we really talk about two modifiable domains. The leisure time domain, what you do in your free time. So that's where you would probably have the kids playing, if you have a place for that, sport, exercise, those types of things, and active travel. The other domains are the occupational domain and home-based activities, which are considered to be a bit less modifiable. So the active travel domain used to be, not too long ago, as we saw in the first presentation, a huge contributor of child levels of physical activity. And by showing the graphs that Zoabe, am I saying that right? Zoabe showed, thank you. It's very concerning because active travel has gone down by a lot among our children, and it's not just in the US, it's in most of the developed world and now happening in the developing world, while opportunities for active leisure are also going away. So recess is no longer a thing in a lot of school districts. Opportunities for safe places for active play is not available for all children. So we're essentially engineering physical activity out of children's lives. And physical activity has a lot of positive health impacts for children. Of course, obesity prevention, and certainly a big one. We're seeing not just a lot of obesity in children, but also sort of early onset diabetes, markers that will probably lead to heart disease later in life at very early stages nowadays, which didn't used to be something that we saw a few decades ago. So very important from that perspective, but also for the mental health problem that we're seeing with children. So there's lots of very clear connections and known mechanisms via which active living connects or prevents mental health adverse outcomes, specifically connected to anxiety, depression, ADHD in children, but also well connected to academic outcomes. It also boosts your immune system, and that's highly relevant. You know, we just underwent a major infectious disease pandemic, and a lot of people don't necessarily connect physical activity to that side of public health. We usually go for the non-communicable disease route, even when we're talking to our own people, meaning public health folks, in trying to convince them of the importance of physical activity. But there's a lot of evidence building up of the importance of active lifestyles and regular, constant physical activity for good immunity. So definitely a lot of routes and mechanisms out there via which physical activity contributes to health. Asthma and allergies were also mentioned, and we do know that there's very clear connections to there. So I think right now I'll leave my answer at that, but I do have other things to say a little later.
All right. Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Zoe, for having us here. I never met a microphone I didn't like, so I apologize in advance. I want to start with a story, if I may, Mary. A number of years ago, we used to do at Children at Risk, and we used to hold these at the United Way, these Future of Children events. And we would have, it would sort of be like a TED Talk, and we'd have groups of people coming and speaking on some interesting topics around children for 18 minutes at a time. And one year we did we talked about transportation and children, and we had someone from the Citizens Transportation Coalition come and speak a little bit. And she was really good, and the whole conference was very good. And then someone from Fort Bend was there, someone who ran a big foundation down in Fort Bend, said, could you do this in Fort Bend County for all of us who don't really venture inside the loop? And I said, yeah, we could absolutely do this. You know, it'll just cost you. She said, no problem. Okay. So we went out to Fort Bend. She said, the only thing is I would let you get all the speakers, but we have an expert on transportation that we'd like to substitute. And turned out the expert was the chair of the foundation. Rich people are always experts, so we said sure, you know. And so that person, the chair of the George Foundation decided that they were going to be the expert on transportation. And the conference was going very well, and everyone was really stimulating a lot of thought. And then the expert on transportation came up to do their 18 minutes on transportation and children in Fort Bend County. And basically he started by saying, you know what we really need is investment in the big highways so that people can get into Houston and go to work and come back and be with their families. And, the air went out of the room. But I felt like it was sort of analogous to really how most of Houston and certainly most of Texas feels about transportation. We want to spend time with our families, and let's use those roads to get back and forth as quickly as possible from work to spend time with our families. Now, after the pandemic, we spent too much time with our families. Maybe it's a different deal. But I think at this point, we still think in those ways. Now, the guy eventually, he came around and they donated even more money to Children at Risk, so he's a great guy. And so I feel like we've used that, though, as this example of what we should be thinking about. And so people think about themselves as adults, and they do not think about kids and the health of children and the benefits around children, right? It's sort of this selfish way of looking at transportation. But indeed, when you start thinking about your own kids, and more importantly, when you start thinking about all children, you start to think differently. Because when we look at the state of Texas, what we have are 70% of all of our children are children of color. 65% of our kids qualify for free and reduced school lunch. And these are the kids that are in these low-income neighborhoods that are struggling to walk to school if they can, that are hoping they have a bike and someplace to ride that bike. And this is the thing that our politicians, right, in Austin are not really paying attention to. They're thinking of their own little worlds and not the world of all of our children. All of us here know that it's healthier for kids to be able to walk to school. It's healthier if they could bicycle to school. It's helpful if the only physical activity that they get is not just forced recess or forced PE. I don't know of anyone who really liked PE. And if that's the only thing that you're getting in schools, that's a little bit of a problem. Deb, you liked PE, didn't you?
Yeah,
You did. Yeah.
But it's okay, go on.
But you get how no one else in your class liked it, right? So if that's the only way that kids are getting exercise, that's a problem. And when we look at that majority of kids in our state, right, the 58% of the children that are Latino and more, the youngest group of families in our state, Latino families, for every white baby born, 17 Latino babies are born in Texas. I mean, this is a growing part of our population, and this is the group that has the highest level of childhood obesity, the highest level of type 2 diabetes, and we're gonna have to figure out another way to get people to exercise and to do more physical activity. A couple of years ago at the state legislative level, this is my last story, Mary. Okay. At the state legislative level, we decided, why don't we make it mandatory that every school district has to have a recess policy. They don't have to have recess. They're just, what is your policy as a school district on recess? And the idea was that when you think about it, well, you really should have recess. We had to go door to door in Austin at the state capitol. And I remember one of the stories that I would tell people, because they're like, well, schools don't really want these unfunded mandates. And I'm like, well, it's just recess. It's good for the kids. And this is what how we had to explain it. Is that, Senator, that when you have a new dog, and if you don't walk your dog, they get a little mischievous. That's how kids are. If they don't get recess, they're going to get mischievous, and they're not going to learn as much, and they're going to be a burden on the school district and on society, just like it had to come back to the pet. They care more about pets than they care about most kids. And that sort of got through to them. They understood that. But and frankly, the bill passed, and then the governor vetoed it because it was carried by a Democratic senator. And so we're back to square one. We don't have a recess policy in the state of Texas, and yet most of those thinking politicians in Austin understand that recess would be good. They understand that physical activity would be good. But more importantly, most of us know that it would be very good for the majority of our children if we had more ways for them to be active, transportation and otherwise, and yet we don't have the built environment that's conducive to our kids sort of doing a lot of that stuff.
Deb, do you want to respond to
Bingo.
the physical activity aspects?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for all that.
It's a lot, yeah.
No, I actually really enjoyed that. I will say, among the things that I wanted to add, I believe, I'm going to guess, that the point of this panel is not per se to learn about the things I listed before. Oh, physical activity is good for A, B, C, D, E, and you can get that through active transport. I'm sort of speaking to the choir here. I think it's more about how do we get those empowered to change policies and make environments safer and healthier for children, and for families to feel comfortable with their children making the healthy choice. How do we get there? And possibly health can be an argument. But we just heard probably health is not what's going to convince, or not the only thing that's going to convince most people that have some purview over these decisions. So that has led me in my work, and I'm a researcher, so take that as it may, to start thinking about what else do we need to measure in terms of the impacts of making a place more activity friendly. And we have a lot of things. The economics of a place gets better. Social cohesion gets better. Quality of life, self-perceived quality of life among the residents of a place gets better. And it's also really good for the environment, planetary health. So it's still health, but the health of the planet. I do think, and a lot of my recent work has gone along the lines of, do we want to, at the individual level, start telling parents or children, yes, you should actively travel to your school in the environments that we have? I think there's a big ethical problem there in saying that, because it's not safe, and that's, getting hit by a car, that's a health outcome, injury and mortality. What are you breathing, quality of the air? Are you actually enjoying this? So there's a concept that in the field of physical activity we call physical activity security. I don't know if some of you have heard this, but it's the same as food security. With food, everybody should have the right to, not be hungry and eat nutritious food and not have to worry about what you're going to eat next. Same with physical activity. Given all its benefits, both at the individual level and for societies, we should really guarantee active opportunities, but really by choice, not by force of, oh, my family doesn't own a car or have sufficient cars to drive me to school, so I have to walk in a very bad environment to get to school. So I do think that we need to think about what's leading to the few kids that are still walking to school in this country. It's probably not happening in optimal conditions. That's really bad for public health. That's really bad for humans from an ethical perspective, so from a social justice perspective. And I do think that we need to, I appreciate Commissioner Garcia's point of, cars are not the enemy, but I do think we need to think about how we're designing our cities and the policies that are in place that really favor car dependency and sprawl. And you can look at it at the micro level or at the macro level. At the micro level, just looking at the intersections where you see a lot of accidents, it's very easy to say, well, the person was speeding or was drinking or whatever, but there's also design elements that we've chosen to place or not place there. Why are there no sidewalks? Why are the lanes so wide? It's very well known that if you have a wide car lane, you're going to speed more regardless of what the posted speed is. And these are decisions that we're making, or our policymakers are making, but they represent us. So I do think, and we have a lot of evidence, I'm basing this from research, from evidence, that we really need to think, if we're trying to bring up arguments to convince people that investing in safe environments for active transportation for children and for anyone, that we need to think of the things that would convince them. And if health can convince some, maybe, I hope so, but there's other things, like pollution, like traffic. Believe it or not, adding more highways does not fix traffic, it makes it worse. So I really hope that, hopefully in the next panel, we'll hear more about those types of solutions.
So yes, there's a panel on policy,
Yeah.
but both of you have alluded to that as a major lever, and that we were talking at our table before we got up here about how do you find the alignment, how do you figure that out. There are policymakers, but I'd also like to think about how we engage families and get them to buy into this, and how do you, you've done a lot of work with parents. There are barriers, people having their kids engage in active transportation or even go to the park. How do we overcome that one? Then we can talk about policymakers.
One of the interesting things is that in a lot of school districts, you have to live over 2 miles or over a mile away from the school before the school bus will pick you up. So there are families that are actively thinking, how do I walk my kids to school, or how do my kids get to school? And I live in Montrose, and I see a lot of families walking and biking their kids to Ella Baker Elementary, right? So that's happening, and we see this in a lot of other neighborhoods as well. And I'll go to the east side of town to Scroggins Elementary in Denver Harbor, and you see, the madres, they absolutely want to bring their kids to school, and if the principal is enlightened enough, they're staying for breakfast at the school as well. So we see that this really, people want this to happen. However, in many cases, it's just too darn dangerous, right? And so they're trying to figure out, one, is there a way I can carpool to get there? Because it's, we don't always have a car. 15% of Houstonians don't own a car, and adult Houstonians. And so there are struggles that we're having in our communities. And so when Commissioner Garcia comes up and he talks about really working on the built environment and sidewalks and focusing on those areas of need that Zoabe was talking about, I think this is what we need to do. And one of the things that the commissioner referenced, Sweden, and if you want to lose an issue in the state legislature, you start with Sweden. And a number of years ago, we were working on an issue around human trafficking. And there are a lot of models in Europe, and there's one called the Nordic model that comes out of Sweden. And I remember going there, and we said, well, we can't lead with Sweden. And so we took that exact model, and we just called it the Texas model. And we went to the state legislature, and we said, this is the way for Texas to stand out as the most innovative state. And it passed, right? Because everyone wants to be great. And so I think about us in Houston and in Texas, sort of focusing on those things that are going to contribute to our children being a vibrant part of the economy. You get back to the economy every time, and they're going to be able to get good jobs because they're going to be healthy, and we're going to work on the built environment, and it's going to provide a lot of jobs to people. It's almost like we have to talk about this Texas construction and street model. We have to sort of reframe it in many ways, because if we talk about it in terms of Latino children need to be safe on their way to school, it's a loser, right? But so we just have to, we may know that, but always when we go to the state legislature, it's how do we reframe it to put it sort of in a way that people are going to understand, that old white guys from the suburbs are going to understand it, those legislators, right? That's going to be the important thing. I grew up in Puerto Rico. But I'm white, so I can make fun of the old white guys. But I grew up in Puerto Rico, and we had horrible infrastructure growing up in Puerto Rico. But my wife, her relatives are from Sweden. And when we go to Sweden, we see the differences. And I look at those differences, and it makes a difference in the welfare of those families. It makes a difference in the welfare of those children when you see the different models. And while we might not be able to use those at the Texas legislative level, we also need to understand those as we make these arguments.
Okay, I have a couple of questions from the audience, and these cards are on the table, so please put your questions down. This reflects back, I think, to something you were saying, Deb. Can you speak on the importance of air quality and kids' ability to walk and roll, including particulates that are tires and emissions, other things that our cars produce?
Yeah. So from the epidemiological side, we have some evidence, and that means looking at health statistics and population patterns versus individual level studies. So we have evidence that when you reach a certain amount, and I don't know the number off the top of my head, but a certain concentration of PM 2.5 and PM 1.0, the benefits that you would get from active transportation sort of eradicate if you're breathing that air. And what types of cities get at those limits? Sometimes Houston, not all year, but we have at least, I would say, probably at least 2 to 3, and probably it could get up to a full week, not continuous, but days like that in the year. And we have many days that get very close. So it's not just a black and white type of thing, but we also know that the closer you get to sort of that turning point where you're annulling and sometimes it becomes a risk for your health to be out exercising, running, or even just walking for a prolonged period of time outside in the environment. It's a continuous relationship. So the closer you get to that, you are sort of reducing the positive benefits of the physical activity that you should be having. So clean air is a really big deal for those of us that are trying to promote active living, and it should be a big deal for everybody because it is also, even at the local level, so not just carbon emissions, but the PM 2.5 and PM 10 values, actually there's a mechanism via which it's adding to climate change. And I know that this is not a climate change panel, and I know that maybe in Texas it may not be the best argument that we can put forth on the table for enacting policy level change, but you never know if there's a person that really cares about that. I do think that we have very strong arguments. We've done studies, one of them a large simulation study of different cities of the world, one of them being a city quite like Houston. We didn't put a name on it, but we simulated a sprawling car-dependent American city and tested different scenarios of change for the city. One of them being, what happens if you added great sidewalks and bike lanes, protected bike lanes, all over the city? Or what happens if you had great public transit all over the city? Or great parks? What happens if you do it all together? We need to really do it all together to get like the best bang for our buck in terms of physical activity going up, injury going down, air quality improving, carbon emissions reducing. But of course, each of these things has an effect in itself. But thinking of those unintended consequences, I think, is also very important, because sometimes you'll add the bike lanes, but if it dies off somewhere because one precinct starts and the other one ends, and maybe there was no coordination, maybe now you got more bikers on the road, maybe some of them are kids, and you just threw them into an unsafe environment on the other side. So I think also thinking about that higher level policy coordination is going to be really important for this topic.
And I think a lot of what we've talked about has been the traffic calming kind of approaches, that one domain. And, as a pediatrician, I work at the kid level, so get a bike helmet on the child.
Yeah.
The traffic calming is kind of the local level, and then the alternative transportation and reducing the number of cars entirely as a state level or a national priority. So that almost an ecological model needs to be employed.
Yeah.
I don't know if you wanted to comment on that question at all, or about.
I always
the
have
kind of-
comments on every question.
Well, good.
But I think, we've done a lot of work on sort of petro-proximate schools, right? So Houston has an unusually large number of schools that are very close to petroleum and chemical plants. And so we see a lot of what you're talking about, sort of that danger of the environment to those kids. But I also feel like, we need to do just a lot more in terms of making sure where we put our schools are not in some of those dangerous areas, but also where people are living, and making sure that kids have that access to those schools, I think is so important, as I've mentioned before. But I really was, this whole idea of all of us doing all these things at the same time, Deb, I think is just so important. And for a long time, I moved here from New York City when I first came to Houston. I came to work at Rice. And one of the things that I noticed right away coming from New York City, right, is you couldn't walk anywhere here. But I've noticed that a lot of people in Houston would always say, well, there's no reason for us to have big sidewalks. It's too hot. No one really wants to walk anywhere. It's too hot. But I've also noticed that that's not true. People do like walking. People do like, if you build a sidewalk cafe, 80% of the days people will be out there unless it's raining or it's really, really hot, which happens. But 80% of the time you're gonna have people out there. And so I think we need to get over this idea that just Houston is too hot, because people do want to have an active lifestyle. Kids are sweaty all the time anyway. And so that it's okay, right? And another little thing is I was in Sweden on a visit, and they wanted to show me this school, and the school was, this is an outdoor school, and they said, we are outdoors all year round. And I thought, well, that's sort of odd, but the kids really loved it, and people liked this idea of showing off this outdoor school. And I came back to Houston, and I said, what if we did something like this outdoor school? And it's too hot. And I thought, Sweden's really cold, you know, and, you know, I'd rather be hot than cold any day. But I think we just have this attitude, it's just too hot to do anything outside. And that also prohibits our public policymakers from acting on some of this.
May I riff on that? Yeah, so a couple of things. In terms of health effects, not necessarily the positive ones, right? A big topic under discussion right now in physical activity is what's going to happen. The weather is not getting better, right? Climate change again. With extreme weathers, whatever that may be. So heat, extreme heat, is that going to be an added problem for anybody to want to be active? One, we have a lot of evidence from across the world, and we do have to look at it across the world because that's where we get the variability, that when you have the right environments, whatever the weather is, has very limited effect on population patterns of physical activity, especially for kids that just want to play and be active wherever they can. So that's an important one. And for a place like Houston, another element that should be happening at the same time, and that the Europeans, of course, Sweden and people in the Netherlands and et cetera are great at, is urban cooling strategies. Trees. So it's not just putting the sidewalk and then the heat is right there.
Right.
You know, trees, places to rest along the road. Again, removal of the cars actually cools down immediately. Having some pedestrianized areas. We don't need all the road space that we have. We really don't. I know it sounds very hard to believe when we see it packed all the time, but when you remove some of that, you'll see that it fills up with pedestrians even when it's very hot. And I'm telling you, we see it because we've studied it anywhere in the world where you do this, it happens. So I do think investing in urban cooling is another important strategy of the things that need to happen sort of at the same time. I'm seeing you. And another element that I wanted to add about the things that we should be doing at the same time that very strongly connect. We want people to actively travel, kids or otherwise. We need to think multimodal. If we don't invest in good public transit, we're still going to have a very car-dependent city, regardless of what we do. One thing is what we can do very close to schools, but really that should be sort of baseline. We should be thinking above that.
And every car needs a parking space, a little bit more pavement to keep it warm. So this, I think I know this question might have come from Zoabe. Speaking about using stories like the hotspots, and how do you, is that should you respond just to the hotspots, or do you have to respond to the whole thing? How do you use data like that to bring the story forward? Is that kind of the question? Oh, so making assumptions is dangerous.
Well, I use hotspot analysis all the time, so I really enjoyed the presentation. In terms of do you just go and address whatever's happening there or not, I think ideally not. Ideally, you take the full pattern, you learn what's happening in the hotspot. We also have cold spots of like, what are the areas that are statistically significant in terms of like, oh, there's nothing happening here. It's very safe in this case. Or it has a lot of physical activity versus too little physical activity, and learn from both to do policies that can sort of fix everything at once. But of course, am I saying, is it not worth going into the neighborhoods where there's a big present urgent problem and looking at the smaller scale or with the ecological perspective, sort of lower level solutions? I think it's absolutely worth it, but I do think that we shouldn't fool ourselves that those solutions are going to be it. We do need to be thinking more upstream if we want to make a difference.
I love the hotspots, and I love the use of data, right? We do a lot of our work based upon use of data. But you can tell the difference, though. Zoabe talking about the data, and then the commissioner talking about Raul. And it moved me a lot more. As much as I thought Zoabe was fantastic, it moved me more, though, to hear about Raul, right? And I think when we try to change people's minds, those stories are important. And when you try to change public policy officials' minds, you almost have to make it personal to them, right? So you have to talk about where it's happening near them and how it's going to affect their kids. Because if it's only affecting the kids in Sunnyside, that's really bad for those kids. I'm really sorry to hear that. But if it's affecting the kids whose parents are voting for me, then it becomes much more imperative. And so the data as a whole, I think, is super, super important, and the hotspots are a whole. But I think if I were changing people's minds, and if I were trying to change legislation, you try to make it more personal. We do a map on childcare deserts. And where are and there are childcare deserts everywhere. But when we go into a legislator's office in Austin, we have a little one-sheet piece of paper on the importance of quality early education and childcare. We have a little map of their district. We have their picture on it. And then we have where are the deserts in their area. When a legislator gets that, the first thing they look at is their picture. They say, oh, you have a picture of me. And then they look at the deserts as it relates to them, right? And so you always have to bring it back to them and the importance for them. I do think legislators and public policy people really care about kids, but they care about their kids and their neighborhood more. And so you always have to try to bring it back to them. Back, more than a decade ago, the state legislature cut public education funding. 2011, this is a long time ago. They cut public education funding, and we did a big study. We worked with the University of Chicago to show the impact of the schools, but we had to show how it was even impacting suburban schools, and it was making schools worse for every single child in Texas. That was the thing that reversed it and got the state legislature to fund our public schools again. So you always bring it to them, I think is important.
One more question, and then if there are any others, we'll take them from the audience. And this is a tough one we've alluded to before. What solutions do you have to convince parents to allow their kids to engage in active transport when our infrastructure is terrible? That's the thing.
A number of years ago, Jay Mendoza was here in Houston before he moved to the University of Washington, and he did, and Zoabe, you have used some of his stuff in your paper, but he focused on this idea of walking school buses, right? The idea that parents would actually walk with a group of kids to school. So they would sort of model, and they'd be there for safety, and maybe it only had to be one parent with a group of the neighborhood. And I've always loved that idea. I don't think it happens enough. It happens some, but this whole idea of a walking school bus, but of parents sort of being part of that activity of walking the kids to school, sort of modeling the safety, what you have to do as you go through. But we have to remember that a lot of our low-income families, they need to work, and so they don't really have time to walk kids to school. So the idea of sharing is sort of a good idea. The idea of principals inviting the moms to have breakfast with them, so that on that particular morning it could work. But I think parents do need to be engaged. It's hard to just send your kids off.
I agree. I mean, I think the question of what should we do to get parents to promote active travel with their own kids in this environment, to me, I'd almost flip like, should we do that? I think right now with this environment, I do think of the ethics of that. I think we need to fix the environment at least a little bit to then be able to nudge the parents and do so in a responsible way. But the environment doesn't just mean the physical environment. It also means that social capital, the types of things that you're talking about. So if we have better programs, if the sidewalks aren't there and the safety isn't there from the physical infrastructure, we do need to provide better programs so that from a societal perspective, we are providing that safety in the numbers. Critical mass, and cyclists talk about this a lot. When you achieve critical mass, in this case of children walking around the neighborhood, all the drivers are aware of them and they're visible, and that provides the safety too. But I don't think that the burden should be on the parents. I actually do not agree with that perspective. I think that it should be something programmatic that maybe schools or somebody else can take care of with input from the parents and with participation from the parents whenever they are available and want to be available. But I do think from an equity perspective, parents that already need to make nowadays the difficult decision of allowing their children to walk to school, bike to school in a very unsafe environment are doing it out of economic necessity, usually lack of cars or just one car in the household and the husband works or whatnot.
Yeah.
So I do think we need to think about that carefully of whether we want to promote it that way.
One final thing, because I think we're going to be giving
Yeah, I
a
think we're
timeout very
gonna-
quickly. Programs like Safe Routes to School do include components of environmental change, parental involvement, things like that. How well do you think we're using those? You probably, Bob, may know how things are being implemented in Houston in a way that, or there may be others out there. Are we taking full advantage of the tools that we've got?
I don't think we are, right? I think, parents don't know of a lot of programs that really help, and the parents that are engaged in a lot of this stuff are sort of the usual suspects, a mom who stays at home or works from home, or a dad who stays at, it's not our typical audiences. And so I think we're not doing the job that we need to do. And I completely agree with Deb. I mean, it has to be a bigger picture type thing. But it does have to start with us. But I think we don't have to rely on the state legislature. We should be putting pressure on our school districts themselves to figure out how to do some of this stuff, because they care about our kids ostensibly, right? And so we want to make sure that they're doing the right things as well.
Great, thank you. I think we may be out of time, but if maybe any questions that have not been passed forward, I think that our panelists will be around for hopefully the rest of the morning or as much as possible. Question there?
Ever considered maybe increasing our programs to increase bus ridership and making buses available? A lot of school districts up here have 2 to 3 to 4 mile no buses provided. Tightening that up to where it's a quarter mile, something, the ones that live very close, obviously, with one bus, but these kids in activity buses, that's another thing I found is pretty much non-existent here. Again, I grew up in a different state, and they had 4 bus routes: before school, after school, activity 1, and then late sports buses. And it really
Thank you.
So the question basically is, should we be using school buses a little bit more, especially when in these unsafe environments, when you have just a mile or 2 miles or 4 miles where you have to live away from the school before you're bused. And, school districts are super pressed right now on budget. And it's one of the things, HISD just came out with a report on inefficiencies, and they talked about how their buses, there's an average of 17 kids per bus, and so they're going to cut money from the bus service. And we see districts that will take kids home right after school, but they won't wait for after school programs. So the very programs that might be helping low-income kids sort of do more activity, they have to leave them behind. Latinos in America have the lowest percentage of activity in team sports of any other group. And so, again, we're sort of stopping kids from being a part of this. We're sort of leaving this idea of physical activity to be for the fluent only. And we're doing this, at our own risk, right? This is our future workforce. And this is us that we're talking about. And we're not doing right by our kids or for our future. Well, that was a good ending line. Wasn't
Amen.
It? Yeah, so, yeah. Thank you all very much.
Thank you all very much. Thank you
Thank
both
you.
for your
You were fantastic.
All right, everybody. I'll be calling up the panel 2 panelists. Whenever you get a chance, just come on up. Yeah. Mr. Keynote. Nice to meet you. In person. In person, yeah. We've met in person. I was embarrassed because I've also spoken to Ryan online. And he came up and said, "Hey, how's it going?" I'm like, "I know you." And I was like, "I'm not."
Trust me, I'm easy to see. Where am I? I'm sitting right close.
She's getting me here. Yeah.
All right.
So wherever you guys want to be, I think she's. Yeah, I see what she's doing. Okay. Thank
Let
you.
me put water bottles out and then perfect.
Yeah. All right. And y'all, just a couple of housekeeping things. We'll be having a 10-minute break right after this panel to mingle, get some refreshments, use the restroom, and then we'll also, just as a reminder, question cards are on the table. I know I should have mentioned this at the beginning. The question cards are specific for each panel. So when they come around, make sure that you have the question that you want to ask that particular panel. And then if you want to ask the third panel, just hold on to the card until the third panel is up. All right. All right, I'm Dr. Hafeez again, and we'll be doing our second panel on infrastructure solutions, small and quick versus big and slow. And we have a great team right here. I'll do some introductions. Let's see, we'll start. Closest to me is Mr. James Keener. James Keener is a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin and has worked in the traffic engineering section of the Houston district for the Texas Department of Transportation for 23 years. In that time, he has served in many different capacities. He's been the Safe Routes to School point of contact, the Highway Safety Improvement Program Coordinator, Fatal Crash Review Team Member, and Special Events Coordinator. In his spare time, Mr. Keener likes woodworking and spending time with his wife and children. Next, we have Mr. Ryan Lavasser. Mr. Lavasser is the founding principal of Lavass Ventures, a Houston-based real estate development strategy firm. Under the tagline of developers are not evil, Ryan specializes in visionary large-scale real estate developments for institutions like the University of Illinois and Southwestern University, as well as commercial developers such as Metro National and the Howard Hughes Corporation. Ryan brings over 20 years and $9 billion in project experience in his past roles as managing director at Rice Management Company, welcome back to campus, Heinz Interest, and HRNA Advisors. Ryan serves on the boards of Lawndale Arts Center, the Midtown Management District, and the Houston chapter of the NAIOP. He also holds degrees from Columbia and Rice. And finally, we have Ms. Carl Pillai. Ms. Pillai leads the Built Environment Unit in the Environmental Public Health Division at Harris County Public Health. Through cross-sector collaboration, the Built Environment Unit provides a public health lens to plans, policies, and projects at the local level, ensuring that communities are designed and developed in ways that promote health and quality of life. She has led projects including assessing the health impacts of environmental concerns such as flooding and heat, examining equitable access to parks, and promoting active transportation to school and parks. Ms. Pillai holds an MPH with a concentration of environmental health science from the University of Michigan and a bachelor's in science in microbiology with a minor in speech communication from the University of Georgia. I don't know what your allegiance is, but congratulations on the national title.
Always Georgia.
Oh, okay, then never mind. Better luck next year. No, it's fine. Better luck next year.
Always.
So I'll start out with a question for Ryan. I was hearing Dr. Bob talk a little bit about, how do you get your message across in Texas and a lot of places. A lot of it comes down to economics, and it comes down to numbers and the economy. So to that point, how do we have that discussion when we talk about educating the public in terms of reducing automobile infrastructure and what that means in terms of developmental costs, in terms of economic outcomes, in terms of the metrics that it sounds like they're speaking over in Austin?
Yeah, I think there's a few ways to look at it. One is project costs for development. The other would be land values. And then a third could be just economic productivity of place. About 0.07% of the United States land is defined as urban centers, walkable areas, truly walkable places that are not necessarily conducive to automobile use. And those areas produce 20% of the nation's GDP. Right? There's more people there, more people thinking, and more activity happening, people coming together and innovating. If you think about project costs, every parking space in a built structure costs $25,000, $30,000. And when you think about those costs applied to a project, if you were able to reduce the parking demand for a building from, say, 3 spaces per 1,000 square feet of leasable space down to 2 parking spaces for every 1,000 square feet of leasable space, you're saving about 6% on your overall project costs. That can be the make or break of a project having any real viability as an investment opportunity. And then lastly, when you think about just land values and walkability, there are many studies that show a direct correlation between property value and the walkability, the walk score, if you will, of those properties. Some say it's as much as 40% for every 10 points in increased walkability. Some studies slice it down a little bit more. It seems like there's greater increased value in cities that are already somewhat walkable. So increased value, you see significant more increased value in more walkable areas of San Francisco on a percentage basis, and certainly nominal dollars as well, than you would in a place like Phoenix. But nonetheless, the more walkable place, the more there is greater land value because of that.
No, that makes sense. And, so to that point, I'm looking over at Parle right now, which is, we were talking a little bit before about you work a lot with developers of all different styles. And, how do you feel like you can communicate both obviously we have this economic benefit of reducing parking burden, but from your perspective, you're trying to communicate like the health benefits of good development, whatever it is. But my question specifically is related to transportation. How do you approach that when you're trying to communicate to not evil developers like Ryan?
Well,
I said we're not evil, to be
That's what I said. I
clear.
said not evil.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay, all right.
yeah.
You're good, you're good.
barring any brawls up here. So we've been fortunate to work with developers of all scales, small scale to large scale, including Howard Hughes actually, and to understand kind of what it takes to want to build with health in mind. Economics are a big factor, but in general, it is kind of something that they've been able to take into their marketing strategy, and that's kind of where we approach it. Like, you do want to build where you have walkable communities because you can promote that and people like that and people will buy into it. And so we've learned to speak their language to appeal to them. But yeah, it is a challenge because there's a portion of these changes that do require funding up front, and that speaks to whether or not the project can happen. But some of what we've worked with, especially our partners on the county and the city side, some of these projects, and it's more about a new way of thinking rather than funding. And so designing with health in mind can just be reprioritizing or shifting design, and it may not always be a cost or that would be necessary. And so those benefits are more easily we can win with those much. And then the other thing that we've been able to do is really use a lot of our data. I know that you had a slide earlier saying that data is missing. We've been able to really collect detailed data for small amounts of areas, specifically around schools or parks or community centers. We can then work with our city-county partners to show, what are the impacts that you're going to see. Some of them do involve more mathematical computations of what do we see, mobility and transportation, how does that relate to dollars? Do we see increase or decrease in the economy, transportation dollars spent? Do we see a decrease or increase in accidents, and how does that relate? So there's a lot that goes on to be able to speak to the right groups and kind of be able to implement some of these changes.
No, thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. And one thing that stood out to me, what you just said, is building with health in mind is I think it sounds like a good tagline, and it sounds like if we expand that, a lot of good things will happen in the region. To that point, Mr. Keener, how, we talk about this topic of small and quick versus, big and slow. We're talking about building with health in mind. Where do you see TxDOT coming down sort of within these parameters?
We are big and slow. Hello, I'm with the government and I'm here to help. We build, as y'all know, We let annually around $1 billion in projects. We are building highways and improving highways and byways throughout the state to better improve mobility around the state. Commercial mobility is a big key of what we do. However, I say we're big and slow, but there's a lot of things that we do that are small and quick. And there's many different ways that people can kind of get small and quick out of us. Things that we do, we don't really think of them as, you know, oh, I'm helping out. Someone calls with a request. We would like to, you know, get a crosswalk put in here. We would like to improve the pedestrian facilities at this particular location. We go out, we check it, we review it, we agree, and we just do it. We a lot of times use maintenance forces and maintenance money, so sometimes we kind of get lost in the picture. You know, we're doing a lot for y'all. Y'all just remember the big things.
I was gonna say, those don't make the headlines.
No.
Yeah.
The NHHIP project, that makes the headlines, you know, expanding Interstate 45, changing the layout of downtown Houston. That's something that people got up in arms in. Other people applauded it. We've had much discussion on it. One of the things that was overlooked in that is we really went through and took a look at the bike and pedestrian facilities that we were going to put out, something we've not really thought of, you know, for years, but in the past decade, I mean, especially, it's coming forefront. So we've really gone out, and this design that's coming out, we're going to have shared use paths and, you know, sidewalks, things that can really help improve the active mobility, you know, improve for pedestrians and cyclists.
And sort of to that point, when we're talking about the small street, the local level, the crosswalk, the pedestrian and cyclists, how can TxDOT help the local municipality? Because oftentimes it's the local municipalities who are leading the crosswalk, they're leading that intersection. How can TxDOT help with that?
We have a ton of programs that TxDOT uses to fund local initiatives. There's our transportation alternative funding that's run with TxDOT and the MPO. And, you know, with that, these are locations with at least 200,000 people. You come up with a bike and ped project, you submit it to the MPO and to TxDOT, it's reviewed, it's scored, and we go ahead and I'll fund a lot of improvements with that. There's also the Highway Safety Improvement Program, and it's a small and fast, small-ish, we still are TxDOT, but it's small-ish and fast-ish in that within 3 years, the project has to let. And the Highway Safety Improvement Program, its only goal is to reduce fatal and suspected serious injury crashes. So, but it doesn't, you know, normally a Highway Safety Improvement Program project will have to have at least one fatality or suspected serious injury, unless it is something that a city or a county can do systemically along a corridor to show that it is going to reduce those things. And we know a lot of the systemic, you know, projects that come through, we end up funding because it's many times, thankfully, the smaller roads don't have quite the high injury that you see on our major roadways. So again, there's millions of dollars out there, and we're looking to give it away. We love to.
He's looking right at you.
I know.
Give it away.
I'll talk to you after.
Okay, yes.
I have proposals ready.
To that point, Parl, I know, again, we were talking before the conference about a lot of your Safe Routes to School initiatives, and I bring this up because I know a lot, when we're talking about the small roads that need funding, a lot of them are adjacent to schools, and a lot of them are places where we really do need infrastructure updates to allow kids to access those schools a little bit easier. And then also safe routes to parks, which is a close cousin. What has your work been? What's your vision for the future for Harris County when it comes to those kind of projects? What are you thinking, both medium and even long term, if you dare?
So we have been very fortunate to receive several years of funding for our Safe Routes work. We have completed Safe Routes to School work in 3 different ISDs. And during that, and then Safe Routes to Parks work in 1 jurisdiction in Harris County. We've kind of used that time to learn and understand and build kind of an in-house skill set. We've developed tools to go out and actually assess the infrastructure. So we've gone out with our city and county partners to walk the streets, to not just look at are there sidewalks or not, but is it comfortable? Is there shade? Are there dogs? Are there stray animals? What are other factors that would promote or prevent predominantly students, but also if you think about whoever's with them, it could be grandparents, anyone else walking with them. And we've done a lot of this work. Unfortunately, a lot of our funding has ended, and so we're fortunate that the tools have been built, the skill set exists, but that's where I'm gonna come to you for funding, because to answer a question earlier, is enough being done? The answer is no. There's a lot more we can do. Harris County is an incredibly unsafe area to walk, but there are opportunities. We have many school districts who are ready and willing to work with us, that want some of the expertise that we have. They want us to do assessments. We have parents that, won't let their kids walk in communities that are completely safe and walkable because they have this perception that it's not safe. And so one of the things that our Safe Routes to School program has let us do is kind of to talk to the decision makers, talk to the community, talk to the students, train students on how to walk and bike safely, train parents on what tools and what information they need to allow their students to walk and bike safely, and then provide infrastructure data to the decision makers so that they can go in and make the improvements to make these communities safer.
Yeah.
But yes, I'm really hoping that we can extend this this really critical program for school safety.
No, it sounds valuable. I know, Ryan, I'm going to ask you a question that a little bit off the books a little bit, which is, Parl's working with the local school on programming as well as maybe some infrastructure changes. TxDOT is helping out with those infrastructure changes. The developer down the road might be aware of this, but what kind of changes can they make specifically to the infrastructure around their building that they're, let's say, building a brand new building on a greenfield? What kind of small changes or maybe even those subtle design changes that can have maybe not a ton of cost, but outsized effects in terms of complementing everything that's going on the block?
Yeah, so one thought, this is the taking a shower in the morning and something just pops in your head, right? So this morning, just thinking about this very topic that you asked about, and so much of our public realm is based around fire truck access. And those are big and cumbersome vehicles, and therefore roads need to be wider than they would have to be for other types of vehicles. And then I was like, well, what the hell? This is based on the length of a ladder, right? Is it the length of the hose that we store in these trucks? And so why stop there? Why stop at the fire truck is the reason our roads are wide? Let's innovate on ladders and let's innovate on hoses so we can have smaller fire trucks. Therefore, we can have smaller roads. Therefore, it's not as scary to cross a wide road. Therefore, cars are not going as fast down these boulevards, which are really just side streets. So that was the first idea I had this morning in the shower. But just in general, look at the Dutch. I know that came up earlier, but and I am obsessed with the Dutch. They have many great solutions. The types of paving materials, right? A brick is a human-scaled object. Asphalt is not, right? And so when you see human-scaled objects, you think about other humans. And so brick paving sends a signal to drivers, hey, there's people here. Crosswalks that are raised give priority to the pedestrian, not to the car. The car has to slow down to make that turn. Tightening corners, right? Making the radius smaller so that when people do make that turn, they're driving at a slower speed. Overall street width, tightening that up. There's a lot of things that we can do in our public realm that are, well, they save money because it's less of it, but two, they just make it far more pedestrian friendly.
Yeah. That's good. I'm going to take a quick note because that was pretty informative. Mr. Keener, what do you, I'll just leave it open. Like, what do you think about everything, what everyone's saying?
Yes, the defining clear spaces for pedestrians is very important. Defining clear spaces for pedal cyclists is also important on certain roadways. Now, many of our roadways, we don't actively discourage. However, 45 is not pedestrian. It's not built for pedestrian. I-10 is not built for pedestrians. Our frontage roads, we have put elements out there, and of course are improving those elements, every time we come out and work, because yes, we may have pedestrians. Yeah. One of the things about brick pavers, there are certain rules. I know that the federal government, it's not that they discourage brick pavers, but that it's engineering stuff.
It's a maintenance issue.
It is definitely a maintenance issue.
Yep.
However, putting in something like the continental crosswalks, which is now our new standard, and we are going citywide right now. We have a project that is really countywide, district-wide, to put in continental crosswalks.
Could you explain what they are?
Okay, a continental crosswalk, normal crosswalks in Texas are two lines that are, perpendicular to the roadway. It's just two lines. You have a stop bar, and then you have two lines. A lot of people think that, oh, this is the first stop bar, and then I can just roll through to the last stop bar, and of course it blocks pedestrian access. The continental crosswalk they are perpendicular or parallel to the roadway, and they're 24 inches wide, I think 6 feet long. There are these white rectangles that go all the way across the road, much more visible to the driver. Pedestrians feel safer using them. So we're going in and putting those all over the place. It is now our new standard for the state. And I'm sure y'all have been seeing it coming, a lot more places. Again, inviting pedestrians to use what we have. One of the things that I'm kind of a big advocate on is educating pedestrians. Raise your hand if you remember the last time you were taught to be a pedestrian. No, yeah. Elementary school. Look left, look right, look left again, cross when it's safe.
I remember that.
What is a legal crossing, kids? When you're walking down the road, should you be facing traffic? Should your back be to traffic? When you're riding a bicycle, what are the state rules for that? What are state laws for that? Many of our educational components and many of the people who are educating pedestrians don't necessarily know themselves. So education, especially for the pedestrian and for the cyclist, is very important. And TxDOT has an abundance of resources on our traffic safety page, encouraging people to learn these rules of the road and learn these pedestrian rules. It makes everyone safer when they know what they're supposed to be doing. And of course, kids learn better than adults. Teach kids, and of course adults have to be good teachers as well. Okay, we're gonna cross the street this time, but don't do that. Well, you've just told them it's okay to do every once in a while. No, walk down to the crosswalk, hit the button, patiently wait, go across. It's fine.
Yeah, that's word for word what this every child book will tell you. Don't do what I say, do as I do. One thing that stood out to me when you're talking about the crosswalks, I just wanted to ask y'all, because I don't get a chance to sit with people as qualified as you every day, and this is an open question. Raised crosswalks, raised sidewalks when they're crossing a commercial driveway, those have seemed to come into fashion, and when I've observed them in the Houston area. They seem to be effective. Is this a viable, is it a potential panacea? Is it one tool in the toolbox kit? When is it applicable? When is it high yield? When is it low yield? And where do y'all come down on it as an option?
It is definitely one tool in the toolbox, and it's not a one-size-fits-all tool. Again, on a frontage road, on one of our major arterial roadways, it's going to create havoc. We have fast-moving traffic. It's impractical. However, on local roadways, on city center areas, on areas where you have a lot of pedestrian activity and a lower speed roadway, they work wonderfully and should be put in, and we've funded projects to do that. No, I'm not supposed to be saying that. No, we do fund these things. We actively fund these things. The federal government, the FHWA, in their works that, what works and what doesn't. Definitely raised crosswalks, high visibility crossings, using pedestrian hybrid beacons. Many times on a state roadway, you're not going to find these elements because most of our state roadways, you all know, most of the state roadways are built for cars and they're built for moving traffic rapidly. And I don't want to sound like an evil guy here, but that is kind of our gig. We take care of the big roads and we will help you take care of the smaller roads.
If you put a small road element like a raised crosswalk, if it is a brick material, the volume of traffic that's going over that is so much more significant than at a small road.
Right.
Those things are going to be beat up
Yeah,
pretty quickly. It's bigger vehicles at faster speeds running over them. But they do several things. They make everybody 6 inches taller, right? Which is great for children,
Yeah.
especially in this state where everybody drives a car that's way bigger than it needs to be. It's
I love my big truck. Come on now.
unless you're self-employed and then you get the tax benefit of it. They make us all taller. They signal to the vehicle slow down. They force the vehicle to slow down, and the change of materials says to the driver, "This is not your zone. This is the pedestrian zone. Welcome to it, but go slowly."
I was going to make a comment too. So in public health, or at Harris County Public Health, we are not on the implementation side. We have no jurisdictional authority to go do any kind of road work anywhere. But just working with planners, we've noticed that some of this information, I think Zoabe had asked what can be done in the public space. And a lot of these things that we think about, it's just not readily available. So just to toot our own horn, later this year, and one of our staff members here is taking the lead on it, Elizabeth, so you can go ask her more questions. We're putting together like a healthy development guide that actually is like a resource guide that kind of connects on the why you should build and how you should build and what you can consider when developing, and more of a thought process that you as a planner, developer, community partner could go through to make your design better. And so that's just, will be available at some point, but we'll send it out.
I'll be on the lookout.
Can I just build on that? And here in Houston, so much of the public realm and the dollars to improve it are funneled through tax increment reinvestment zones. And I think they, in general, need more flexibility in how they can allocate funds to projects to allow for things like that may be inherently more expensive, but are better improvements to the public realm. And so we don't need lowest common denominator solutions with the public funds. We can use these TERS dollars to make for better places.
Interesting. To that point, how do we, I want to make sure I ask this question the right way. And before I ask the question, I do want to put a PSA. no one here is evil. Mr. Keener just mentioned that. I don't know if I've communicated that enough.
No, I'm a wonderful person.
But really, to Ryan's point, how do we where is the developer community right now in terms of the conversations we're having right here? How much buy-in is there, and how do we, whether the public or private side, be more effective communicators in creating this holistic view of what a neighborhood is, especially for kids?
The tagline they have, developers aren't evil, they're just misunderstood. And they're misunderstood because in many ways they're not the decision makers. It's the capital markets, it's the investors and the lenders that are making a lot of the decisions in what projects they will fund. And applying that to Houston, look, Houston has no zoning, it has no geographic boundaries, it's a modern city based on the automobile, and it is a commodity economy, right? So all of these things add together to make for the real estate community to produce the lowest common denominator product, right? And so the investment world says, oh, we're going to deploy dollars into Houston. Okay, we know how to do that. We know what projects we can put money into. It's not the projects that I think everybody in this room wants to see, right? It's more of the same of what Houston is. There are contrarian developers. There's great developers like Steve Rome and Oxbury and many others that are doing really, really thoughtful projects in this city. Their ability to find the investors is challenging. They're able to do it because they produce places that people want to be, that produce outsized returns. And maybe it was hard on the first one, but the second one, investors like JP Morgan Chase come along and say, we want to be on your next project. So there is a movement there, but it is not a movement that is enveloping the entire city. It's the one-offs that are thoughtful, patient, and catch the eye of the investors.
Understood. Yeah. I'll go to some questions. One question really stuck out to me from the audience, which was, and this is for everyone, our neighborhood installed speed bumps and this significantly slows drivers down. Could these hotspots in residential areas have speed bumps installed, and would this help? And I think the essence of the question is, the experience of this question asker is saying, hey, speed bumps really helped. Now I've gone on record now saying I'm a big fan of these raised crosswalks. What are the options in terms of more speed bumps, sort of, especially in residential areas and areas where it can fit well? And I'll add on, what are some of the other, what are y'all's favorite infrastructure sort of pet thing that can help kids get around better? Everyone.
Okay, well, I won't speak speed bumps because I know that's very controversial.
Are they? I didn't know
yeah,
that.
it is amazingly controversial.
Yeah.
But some of the really wins that we've noticed, lighting is one of them. Signage is really important. Those are things people can get behind. It increases safety, and it's, it increases mobility. We've worked with communities to do artistic crosswalks. So just some of those little things can increase wanting to walk too. Yeah, I'll leave the speed bumps to you guys.
No speed bumps. I think there's two things. One, I totally agree with lighting. I'm on the Midtown Management District Board, and we're working with Centerpoint on lighting the public realm. Didn't know this, but Centerpoint's obligation is to light the vehicular right-of-way. They have no obligation to light the pedestrian right-of-way. Make your own comments on that, but that seems backwards.
Seems like an opportunity.
Seems like an opportunity. That's a nice way to say it. And then my second favorite thing is, like so many else, became obsessed with Formula One racing in COVID, and the idea of the chicane, which is a tool to slow down the car. So you make a hard left turn, hard right turn, or vice versa. The car has to go from 200 miles an hour, slow down to 30 miles an hour, and then back up to 200, right? Apply that to our public realm, so cars have to go from 40 miles an hour down to 10 miles an hour, back up to their travel speed. Those slow down the cars. They introduce opportunities for really cool landscaping insertions, for public furniture and things like that just create a more interesting public realm. And guess who does a lot of them? The Dutch.
Speed bumps are effective. The Texas Department of Transportation does not install speed bumps, nor do we install speed humps, which I prefer the speed or speed pads. I prefer them to the speed bump. The speed bump is straight across the road. It affects both sides. It can jar a car. However, the speed pads, they allow for a car to slow down not quite as much. They're not as jarring, but vehicles do have to slow down. However, emergency vehicles, especially fire engines, are able to pass over them. They have a wider wheel set. They can go right over, does not slow them down. They really like those, but we don't install them. Do I have an objection to them? No, not particularly. Personally, not TxDOT. We just don't do it because, again, most of our roadways are higher speed facilities, and putting fixed traffic control in, some sort of fixed speed device, that wouldn't lend itself necessarily to what our goal for our roadway is.
I'm going to push you. What about you personally? Is there anything that you really, as an engineer, are just a fan of?
Well, first off, I'm not an engineer.
Excuse
Don't
me,
you
sorry,
label me
sorry,
with that. No. No, I work with a lot of engineers. I stayed at a Holiday Inn Select. Now, what am I personally a big fan of in safety? I am a very big fan of striping and signing. Using striping, using signing, improving your striping and signing along a roadway, even a roadway without the best facilities or even no facilities. For example, let's say a 20-foot road, which we have in Houston, a ton of them. It's just a 20-foot slab of pavement, slightly crusted, deep ditches. Many times you don't find any striping on it at all. Many times the signing next to it is installed improperly and is all leaning, or, that is low cost, low hanging fruit that can really help with not only the drivers, but can also help pedestrians. If you're walking along a roadway and you're in the grass and next to you is a piece of asphalt that just kind of comes in the dark, you can't really tell where the asphalt ends and the grass begins. Putting a nice 6-inch pavement marking there will really help, give a clear definition of where the edge of the road is. Putting a good center line in, something nice and wide. Again, we use 6-inch striping in the Houston district. It's now statewide. We also find that using the 6-inch actually it's an optical illusion. It makes the roadway feel a little tighter. People slow down. So again, going out and putting down striping, increase the size of your signs. Many times, cities and municipalities, counties, they'll use the minimum size sign because again, it's, we're saving money. Are you? Let's go ahead and save a life. Put that 30 mile an hour 30 mile an hour speed limit sign. Make it larger. Make it so the driver is aware of what the speed limit is. Make it so the driver is aware of where the roadways are. Many times you see the street name signs, they're old, they're very faded, you can't see them, and this happens on our roadways as well, and I'm a big proponent of getting our maintenance to change those out. But, make those a little larger, make them pop, put them in brand new. That helps neighborhoods out, that helps local communities out by, again, defining the roadway and where cars should be.
Okay, just one more quick one, which is two-way roads instead of one-way roads. If you think about, we'll take Midtown Houston, for example. Fannin, San Jacinto, and many other streets are meant to get people in and out of downtown as fast as possible, and you're effectively sacrificing a whole neighborhood for people, as the last panel said, get people as home as possible to see their families, right? Well, Midtown could be a great place to have a family. And when you introduce two-way traffic inherently slows, it's safer to cross. Drivers need to be more alert, and in Midtown specifically, you will get east-west pedestrian activity, which right now you do not have in that neighborhood because the roads are set up to service downtown.
Interesting. Yeah, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Are we doing okay? 5 minutes. Okay, so I will say, let's do, see if we can get 2 questions in, but if we get just one, I think it'll be fine. So there's been much discussion of big roads versus small roads, but much of our issues happen on roads in the middle, e.g. stroads. So stroads really are, you have fast-moving, this is sort of a new term that I think Chuck Marone coined, but essentially there's fast-moving, high-speed roads that are meant to connect places together. Think Memorial Drive. There's not a whole bunch of commerce on the side. You're really intended to move. And you should be approaching higher speeds. And then there's streets where there's a lot of commerce on the sides. There's theoretically pedestrians and bicyclists, and it's meant to be multimodal, and you're supposed to be driving slow. Stroads are essentially the futon of both of those things. And I've been told no one likes futons. I don't know if I agree with that, but I will say that, so a lot of our roads are like that, where you're moving fast, but there's a lot of commerce. Beechnut on the example at the beginning of the deal was an example of that. So this question asker is saying, stroads, where designs and standards intended for big roads are applied to streets with many people, pedestrians and bikes. So the question essentially is, how do we address that? And I think the kind of key here is, when we have these fast-moving roads in our region, that also has some need for kids to be able to cross it, access it, so they can get to school. I'm thinking about a conversation we had where there was a high school, elementary school on a feeder road. How can we address that issue to make the things on the side of the road more accessible, knowing that there's a lot of people driving 50 on that road? Does that question make sense to everyone?
Yes.
Okay, I'll leave it open.
I'm going to say that's incredibly poor planning. Just incredibly poor planning.
I think they're all
And
retired now.
As someone from public health, we really should have thought of these things before, because to retrofit some of these improvements that you need is either financially or space-wise or right-of-way-wise almost impossible. And so you end up with a very unsafe situation. I think your school on the feeder is a great example of what should not be done. And there's no school siting policy in the state of Texas. So, generally they will place a school wherever the land is cheapest, which happens to be alongside, highways or other areas that no one else wants. And so it's just mind-boggling to me, because I'm like, if we had just sat down and thought about it, we could have planned this out for much cheaper and better in the long run. But to go back and retrofit those areas, you end up with smaller improvements that you're still compromising safety, because there's only so much you can do to convert unless you're planning a major thoroughfare renovation, which we're talking years in the making and, millions of dollars. Yeah, we're huge improvements where you're just gutting an entire area. So that's my little soapbox thing.
Yeah, it's a good soapbox.
Can we make improvements? Yes. Can we try? Yes. Will we be able to make a frontage road super safe for kids to cross? Probably not. Just the nature of that roadway itself, how it operates, what its goal is, why is that frontage road there? We can do as much as we can do with, and again, like you said, they are going to be smaller, they're going to be less effective, but it doesn't prevent us from trying. It doesn't prevent us from doing those measures. So again, with an elementary by a freeway on a service road, let us know. The community, the school can come to us, and we can see what we can do. It is what it is. We'll try and take care of it as best as we can. And any ideas are open. We're very open to people's ideas. We'll only laugh at you when y'all leave. No, that's not true. We won't do that.
Well, that was a depressing answer from both of you guys. No, I'm just joking. That was no, I know.
I kept my mouth shut.
No, so let's end this. Let's end this
We're
on
both
a.
government. We can give a little sad news.
Yeah.
Now, insofar as other Stroads?
Stroads.
Stroads,
Yeah.
okay. Sorry, I'm unfamiliar with that term. Insofar as those go, Houston has a ton of them. Bel Air, Beach Nut, Westheimer, 1960, 521, 518, the list goes on, and that's just our stuff. What can we do? Again, work with the local partners, work with the local municipalities, see where the pedestrian problems are, see where the bicycle problems are. We're not adverse to making changes along our roadways, and I know the city is not adverse to making changes along their roadway. We are working a lot with the city of Houston through the HSIP program, and they're putting in a lot of more bicycle-friendly, pedestrian-friendly roadways. They're coming soon.
All right, thanks for, so that was, I really
I'll throw
did.
you a little
Yeah, I like that, thank you.
life preserver there.
And so to end on a positive note, let me ask each of y'all, I think we have a couple of minutes, maybe 1 or 2 minutes. So what is your vision, pie in the sky vision for the Houston region over the next 10 or 20 years? And then we'll close out.
I become general overlord. No. Let's see, pie in the sky. Oh, wow. That's a good question. That is a good question. Separating our traffic needs is something that I think that would be my pie in the sky. So many of our roadways, they're dual purpose. You know, we're serving locally, the Strode.
Yeah, futons.
So many futons. So many of them are, okay, it is for commerce, but it's also for pedestrians and neighborhoods. And getting that kind of separation, putting commerce and through traffic in the freeways, putting local traffic on the local roadways, that is my pie in the sky.
Ryan, I'll let you have the last word.
So I've been fascinated with a few things lately. One, I learned about oxytocin, which is the chemical that that your body produces that make you happy when you have eye contact with another human. And then the PERMA model from Dr. Seligman out of Penn, where he talks about what are the ingredients of happiness, and it is about connectivity to other humans, the sense of accomplishment, the sense of being tied to something greater, of a greater good or a greater purpose. I think we can come out of this pandemic and all the weirdness that we've been in and recognize that human connectivity can be the driver for value, for real estate value, and I think we see this in some of the isolated examples here in Houston. I want to see those projects that bring us together as humans, that make us appreciate each other more. Those are the ones that will set the example for better placemaking. Those then can then have the knock-on effect of more safer places.
Amen. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. All right. I think that does it for us. And we are. I'm sorry. You had another statement. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. That's just my team always supporting me. I love them. So I will just end on a really quick note. I would like to see a Harris County where we can be more thoughtful in our planning practice, more interdisciplinary, and really kind of thinking outside of what has always been and continuing that path, and instead thinking of a kind of allowing for creativity to produce maybe something different and hopefully more positive in the future. So.
Well said. Thank you, Carl. Appreciate that. All right, thanks everybody. And I think we're officially on a 10-minute break, so enjoy yourselves, have a coffee.
Thank you. You actually worked with Melton?
Yeah, he moved to Arizona.
Oh, he did.
Hi guys, I'm Sandy McKay and I'm excited to bring to you guys our third panel today, Legislative Priorities and Opportunities. I have an esteemed panel with us today, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce each one of our members with us. First of all, we have Sally Alcorn, who was re-elected to a second term on Houston City Council in November of 2023. She's an at-large representative and focuses primarily on citywide issues, budget and finance, transportation, infrastructure, and public safety. She currently serves as the chair of the Houston-Galveston Area Council, and during her first term, she chaired City Council's Regulatory and Neighborhood Affairs Committee and was the vice chair of the Transportation, Technology, and Infrastructure Committee. She has over 15 years of City Hall experience working in the Housing Department, the Mayor's Flood Recovery Office, and as a City Council staffer. She has a degree in finance from the University of Texas and a master's in public administration from the University of Houston. Sally and her husband George have been married for 35 years and have 4 grown children. Next, we have Peter Eccles, who is the Director of Policy and Planning for Link Houston, a nonprofit organization that advocates for a robust and equitable transportation network. He develops the organization's policy positions and research reports and distills legislation and agency plans for community presentations. He has over 7 years of transportation planning experience across the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. Peter has lived car-free in Houston since moving in 2016 and relies on public transit, his bike, and his feet for daily needs. He is an instructor certified by the League of American Bicyclists and has completed over 4,000 miles of cross-country touring and spends his weekends giving historical bike tours of downtown Houston. He has received his Bachelor of Arts in Urban Studies from Vassar College in Poughkeepsie. I was looking at that going, I don't think I know how to say that. And is certified by the American Institute of Certified Planners. And finally, we have Joe Catrufo, who is the Executive Director of Bike Houston, a nonprofit organization on a mission to transform Houston into a city where anyone can safely and easily get around by bike. Joe has 14 years of experience in advocating for safe, sustainable, and equitable transportation. He has previously served as a communications director for the New York City-based Transportation Alternatives, where his work has led to the renewal and expansion of school zone speed safety camera programs and has led program coordinators for the Boston-based Walk Massachusetts, where he has led Safe Routes to Schools initiatives in communities across the state. Joe has a master's in urban and environmental policy and planning from Tufts University and a bachelor's from Bridgewater State University. Please join me in welcoming this esteemed panel. So we spent a lot of time today listening to a paramount of evidence about the importance of making sure roads are safe for kids and the community is safe for kids, and knowing about the various risks about the built environment and how that can influence there. And certainly as a pediatrician and as a policy expert and an advocate, I know that sometimes it can be really hard to change hearts and minds of those that are decision makers. Especially when you're using just evidence alone. In your experience, what are the opportunities that we have when we're looking at policy, especially in the area of active transportation, to make change here in Houston? Kind of open it up to the panel here.
So when we think about how cities like Houston are built, and most cities and regions in North America, clearly the number one priority for a long time, and I'm talking more than half a century, has been to move as many vehicles as quickly as possible from point A to point B. And so every attempt to do something different from that is often met with resistance from some individual, some neighborhood group, some corporation, whoever it might be. There's always pushback when it comes to trying to undo what has been done and done over and over again. It's easy in a place like Houston, lovingly known as the Petro Metro, that we have chosen this physical makeup because this is an oil town, right? This is a driving town. But what Houstonians actually want is different. About half the population routinely, according to the Kinder Houston Area Survey, says they want streets that prioritize all modes of transportation. And that's true going back to 2007. In every Kinder Houston area survey, that's what half the population wants. And people are willing to trade square footage on their homes to be able to walk places more. So I don't have a policy proposal, but I do think our leaders need to understand that what we have isn't necessarily what we want. And the way that we glean information, that decision makers get that information from the public, is also flawed. So if we started with the way we do community engagement, for example, when does city council meet in Houston? 2 o'clock on a Tuesday. Not a whole lot of people can get to those meetings. I'll stop there.
You know, Joe, the Kinder survey is probably a lot better survey than I did. But when I was running, we polled this question. We asked it a couple different ways. We said, you got a choice. Improve infrastructure in Houston should prioritize maintaining and enhancing existing roads for smooth traffic and keeping the city's infrastructure in good condition. Or Houston's infrastructure needs multi-use roads designed for all road users, including pedestrians and bikes, with expanded sidewalks for a more inclusive, accessible, and sustainable city. It was 60-40. 60-40 towards, roads, get us moving down the cars faster and versus kind of the multimodal use. A lot broke down on age, a lot broke down on political party. It's a push-pull. You're right. This is an energy town. I'm married to a petroleum geologist who drives a big Chevy truck. I have a plug-in hybrid EV. But he gets it. He gets it too. I mean, I think people are starting to get it. It is changing a lot, having to change people's minds. And we have to, especially in communities where there's a lot of places to go. I mean, empty nesters want to walk to the bars as much as the young people want to walk to the bars and restaurants. It's more accepted in some areas than others. And it's a different conversation in some neighborhoods than others. And it's our responsibility as leaders to really listen to each neighborhood, to each community. And I think we don't want to divide up into these camps, because it hurts the efforts that I think we're trying to accomplish here. Everybody's going to have to give a little to get to where hearts and minds are changed.
I think telling those stories first with data is very important. The Kinder study backs up that a large share, in some cases a majority, want places where they can walk with their kids and feel safe and walk around. There's a decent size in your survey as well. In surveys that Link Houston is conducting right now on Metro riders, one of the questions we're asking folks is, compared to before COVID started, are you riding more often, about the same, or less? The narrative that we're hearing everywhere was transit, COVID changed everything. Transit ridership is down substantially. We need to readjust. We're finding that a large share of current Metro riders are riding more often today than they were before COVID. And using data to tell these stories is very important, because we all have a different experience. But really, we have to keep in mind that when folks are making these big pronouncements of people don't want to walk or whatever statement they're making, they're really projecting from their own personal experience. And one of the things that we can do to address that is to help sway people's personal experiences to come around to personally recognizing the value in sidewalks, in shade, in feeling safe of walking around your neighborhoods. Just as Zoabe mentioned earlier, he threw out all these facts and figures, but we were all the most moved when Commissioner Garcia told that story about Raul. If more people can have stories in their own lives that they can connect to, that's really going to make all the difference, I think.
I'll say stories and personal experience as well. We're sitting at the table with a city council member who every Friday, famously on Twitter anyway, does something called No Car Friday. I know that the council member took transit here today.
I did.
We need more decision makers who are willing to do that. We have a new Metro chair. Does she use Metro? I don't know. Do we know any other council members who get around by other means? Decision makers tend to, like somebody earlier, one of the panelists earlier said, rich people make a lot of decisions, and rich people tend to drive. And we're not seeing decision makers use alternative modes of transport. we have a lot of decision makers who tend to see the world through the lens of a windshield, and that's problematic for kids who can't drive.
Since he brought it up, I did have to really race across Westheimer today. We are getting a hawk signal, part of the boost 82 Westheimer. We're getting a hawk signal right there at Timmons. But bus was coming, and I was on the other side of Westheimer. I froggered away. I froggered over to it. I needed to get on that bus. It wasn't a dangerous situation. I would not have run a dangerous. It's too far to the, I mean, I know I should go to the crosswalk, but it is so far to each of the crosswalk. Nobody goes to the crosswalk. So, yeah, I took the 82 to the red line, got to do a beautiful walk through Midtown Park. You see a whole lot. You see the need for the hawk signal, first of all. Pretty good sidewalk situation that I was on today. Get to the red line, come here. Great way to get into Rice. Got the full walk through Rice, which is so beautiful. I don't know why I don't spend more time here. And there was a speaker that came to public session, Joe, I think I told you this week. And I actually left him a message on his cell today, who really, he doesn't have a car either like you, Peter. He was, and just really so eloquently spoke about community and how walking and biking and getting on the bus gives him a better sense of community, has him see more storefronts, has him see more of his neighbors. You know, I do it on Friday when schedules are a lot more lax. You know, this is a car city. I'm not, you know, telling everybody to get out of their car, but every once in a while, it is really great to experience that. We had one Friday night date night downtown. We had an event downtown. George was like, oh my God, I'm riding the bus downtown on Friday night. Rode downtown, walked through, the thing was at the GRB, walked through Discovery Green. There was a beautiful art exhibit. And he turned to me and he said, I would never have seen this art exhibit had we not ridden the bus down here. So, you know, I love the way the speaker put it, and I think there's a lot to see outside of the windshield.
Yeah. Active transportation is at its core a habit. This is something that you need to introduce into your own lifestyle and get comfortable with to truly adopt. The council members' No Car Friday is an example of somebody building a habit, intentionally trying something out, I'm sure getting better at it, introducing other people in your life to that and trying to demonstrate the value. I'll give you one example from my own life. I love live music. My friends do too. We go to White Oak Music Hall pretty often. Getting there can be a nightmare. You're either paying way too much to park, or you're parking illegally and disturbing the folks in the neighborhood, or you're shelling out for an Uber. But there's also a light rail station that's about a 10-minute walk away from there. That's a $2.50 round trip to get to a concert. You usually go to concerts with friends. I've introduced people to an alternative way of getting there, and now they're doing it on their own. These are examples of how everybody has a role to play in this, and leaning into your own network of connections to try and spread a message that you already know to be true.
And certainly, I'm hearing a lot of this sense of opening your eyes to the community, especially when you think about active transportation. And a core piece of community is also looking at children and how we can engage children in active transportation. And some of the things that we have seen, especially with things like the City of Houston School Sidewalk Program, offers, you know, new sidewalk construction to and from schools, so we can help promote kids, you know, actively walking to and from schools. But some of these programs are hindered by funding. How can we find avenues that will prioritize funding so that we can move forward to make these routes, especially for children, so that we can promote this sense of community and we can, you know, promote prioritization of funding to where we can capitalize on this?
We're going to have to put more resources into sidewalks. We leave sidewalks up to the property owners. It's your responsibility to build them, to maintain them, all of it. So we spend about $3 million a year on our Safe Sidewalk program, which is the program if you're 4 blocks from a school, and on our disability program if you're disabled, and some on major thoroughfares. We were successful in getting Mayor Turner to put in an extra $5 million last year in, plus we have now a new sidewalk fee in lieu of program that puts a couple $1 million in. All in all, the 10+ million that we were able to cobble together last year will work through our safe sidewalk backlog over 94 projects, and our pedestrian accessibility review. That's the disabled program. We're going to work through that backlog. Still not nearly enough money, but we have to push for more funding. We also get funding from the tax increment zones, from management districts, from federal grants. There's a couple big federal grants, Telephone Road, Bissonnette. We put some work into Gulfton area on sidewalks, but I'm going to be really pushing for a sidewalk bond. We need to spend big on sidewalks. We have 5,167 lane miles with sidewalks. We've got almost 4,000 lane miles without any sidewalks at all. There's a lot of open ditch neighborhoods that could still have sidewalks. So we worked on some of that at the end of my last term, and really just for like a $50 million, 20-year bond. It's $10 million a year, which isn't even enough. But we've got to start investing in it. So I'm really going to be pushing for sidewalk bond. It doesn't interfere with our Rebuild Houston program, our pay-as-you-go street and drainage programs. We can pay for sidewalks with debt. So that's what I'll be pushing for. It's it's just money. It's $1 million to build a mile of sidewalks. It's $400,000 to improve a mile of sidewalks. So it's big money.
Yeah, I think the council member elaborated on how the city's doing a pretty admirable job with the resources it has on tackling the sidewalk issue, but the scale of this is really just insurmountable. Or I hope not insurmountable. I'm glad that we have champions for it, but it's a lot larger than people realize. Houston is a massive, massive city. There are too many streets to count that don't have a sidewalk at all. Not to mention the sidewalks that are in dilapidated condition and just are not possible to navigate for a large segment of our population. So I think that there needs to be a lot more education and awareness of the scale of this issue and just how much it impacts people. That even if you see a sidewalk, it could be discontinuous or otherwise substandard, and again, practically useless for somebody in a wheelchair or with a mobility issue of some kind. Because it's going to take that awareness to work up the political appetite for something like a bond or some sort of more substantial action. So again, this is something that I hope people can educate their friends and neighbors about, is that there's a basic form of infrastructure that so many Houstonians simply don't have access to.
And if I can add to that, something that often gets overlooked, we talk about the upfront costs of building transportation, but we rarely talk about maintaining it. As someone who does bike advocacy, I hear maybe the number one complaint that I hear from people, and these are people who are fully on board with our mission, is that we don't do a good enough job clearing debris out of Houston's on-street bike lanes. And that's not just a problem because you could get a flat tire, but if there's enough debris in a protected bike lane, you might just decide, I'm going to ride outside of it and take my chances riding in mixed traffic, which kind of defeats the purpose of building a protected bike lane in the first place. So, it's budget season now, and 2 years ago, we were very successful in convincing City Council, thanks in part to Councilmember Alcorn, to spend a little money on a narrow street sweeper to fit inside of those protected bike lanes, but it's just one, and we've had a lot of success building out a pretty big network of these bike lanes. So we have to build these things, of course, but we have to maintain them too. So, it's more than just about that upfront cost.
Yeah, and certainly I'm hearing that there's, we've got policy priorities that are here, but there's also a lot of barriers that are being introduced, in order to maintain things, to keep things safe for pedestrians and for children, in order to promote active transportation. So what are some of the obstacles that communities face when they're trying to implement policies that are designed to improve safety conditions, especially for children?
Do you want to go?
Sure, I'll take a pass at this. There are mountains of invisible regulations, laws, guidance around roadway design that impact every single aspect of why a street looks the way it does. There are warrants that you need to meet to install a traffic signal at a given intersection or a crosswalk even. There are state laws around how you can set the speed limit on your street. In Texas, what they call the prima facie, it's a legal term for the default speed limit on streets, is 30 miles an hour. Your residential street where kids might be playing, the speed limit is 30 miles an hour. Go stand next to a car going that fast. I guarantee you it's faster than you think it is. The state says that that's the default speed limit, and you need to overcome all of these obstacles block by block, street by street, to prove that you can lower it less than that. In addition, there are manuals and guidance around how wide a road needs to be, how wide the lanes need to be to meet a certain threshold. And what's really difficult for communities is that all of those things that I just mentioned, and even more, sort of run the gamut in terms of how enforceable they are and whether or not they carry the force of law. And when a road designer or an engineer is explaining these things to you, they're all describing it as if they're equally enforceable, and they're not. Things around, say, the level of service of a street, whether it meets A, which is in the engineer's world the gold standard. It means a free flow of traffic. There's nothing in the law that says that you need to meet a level of service A on a road or something like that. So really being communities' literacy over those things is very challenging, and it's not always made easier by the folks who are designing streets to help people understand that.
I mean, one of the biggest barriers that we have is, and Zoabe mentioned this, is the data, right? We don't collect very good data on transportation. Other cities do this with newer camera technology. When it comes to measuring how many people ride bikes in Houston, we have Strava, which doesn't really measure bike ridership. It measures how many people use Strava. We have a few permanent counters. There's one on the MKT Trail. There's one on Holman Street that TxDOT runs. There's a couple on the Braze Bayou Trail. Houston Parks Board puts out a few. You may have seen there a pair of sort of like black rubber hoses going across the trails. We have a little bit of data from these counters, and then beyond that, it's like, Metro counts the number of people who put bikes on the front of their buses. You can't prioritize what you don't measure, and fortunately, this new administration is very much interested in data, and so I'm eager to see. It's hard to answer the question, how many people actually ride bikes in Houston, and how can we defend taking lanes away from cars, so to speak, to put in bikeways if we don't know how many people ride bikes. So I consider the amount of data we have to be a barrier, and technology is a real solution there.
Just one more thing I might add to that is that sometimes the data won't tell you the story that you actually need to hear. If you are looking to install a crosswalk on a busy street or something like that, and you go out and count how many people are crossing there, you might find it's 0, because who would cross a dangerous street? Does that mean that we shouldn't put a crosswalk there? What's the analogy of you don't decide to build a bridge based on how many people are drowning in the river? It's not always possible to quantify the latent demand for active transportation.
And maybe one of the barriers is we're not always asking, as policy makers, not always asking the right questions, not really getting the right data. We hear about problems with children specifically when somebody's hurt. I mean, that's when we hear about it, and we need to be better at going to communities, not at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, but asking, hey, how is, the city doesn't really run the schools. I mean, it's a whole separate thing. So we're not always talking in that language, but I know I could be better at saying, hey, where's the school? How's the walk to school? What's going on around the school? And asking the right questions.
And then, Congresswoman or Councilwoman, when we look at hearing from people, and that's really a lot of the work of the decision makers, hearing from the community, how can agencies come together and collaborate and work with decision makers in order to raise these barriers and these obstacles that we're hearing in order to prioritize the key objectives in order to make roads and communities safer for children? what strategies have you seen work effectively in your line of work?
Well, that's just it. I mean, you have to work with the metro, you have to work with the school district, you have to work with the bike, people, you gotta work with you just gotta work with all the different community leaders. We have a super neighborhood network, that can be effective. I mean, it's all about just gathering information, I'm sad to hear that there's not, I mean, this is kind of the first I'm hearing. I mean, you hear anecdotally about ridership and all that kind of stuff, but obviously we need to improve the data coming from all the different agencies, but just a collaborative look at, how we tackle those. I know I worked some together for Safer Roads, is that the name of the group, came in and we did the Gulfton. I mean, they were great. I mean, that was a great collaboration. To work with them and the Gulfton community on getting that done. I mean, the community has to get really involved because they walk the streets, they know where the problems are, they can really inform us. So, I don't know if that answered the question. Collaboration, good. I mean, that's like such a standard answer. I should have had a better answer for that. Sorry. They probably will.
I think that your example of what happened in Gulfton is an illustrative one. It was a cross-collaborative initiative of the City of Houston, some other nonprofit groups, to work with Gulfton residents, high schoolers, who then went out and surveyed people on the street and then came up with a collective vision that was then later implemented. And the lessons to be learned from that are meeting people where they are, and helping community leaders, community members, everyday residents take ownership over it, in some cases because they helped design what the end product was. At Link Houston, the survey that I was talking about earlier, we didn't expect transit riders to come to us, but we were out there at 7 in the morning, in the evening, on weekends, at the transit centers, interviewing riders as they were waiting for buses, and then taking their contact information if they wanted to share it with us. They'll be the first to receive our report on what our recommendations on how to improve public transit is. So we have a massive city, 660 something square miles. That's like the size of a state in some parts of the country. We can't expect everybody to come to our downtown offices. We need to go out into those communities and engage with them directly, and well in advance of us knowing what we want.
We hear a lot about partnership projects in my world. Very rarely does a bikeway get built by just one entity. Like the city alone has built very little and funded very little by itself. But a lot of the funding happens with a few different entities chipping in. Maybe the most famous example is Precinct 1 Commissioner Rodney Ellis, who has spent probably more than any other agency by a lot on bike infrastructure. And the way he did that was by saying, hey, look, City of Houston, I will help you maintain and fix and rebuild these streets. But if you want my money, it needs to be multimodal. We can't just put the streets back the way they were. If we're going to dig them up, this is an opportunity to make them safe. And so that's one way that the city can be working with other agencies by keeping an open mind and by prioritizing the things that I think we know we all need, and getting the job done through who has the resources, who has the ability to sign off on these things. You go down WA and Commonwealth, which have new protected bikeways. That was a partnership project between Precinct 1 and the city. The big, wide, beautiful side paths on Cullen over by the University of Houston, that was a partnership project with Precinct 1, the city, and the University of Houston. I think we rode that together once.
We did.
But you can see that when we work together, we get really good results, and we don't have to scrimp on the dollars when we can work with funding partners who have more to spend.
Yeah. And certainly some of the things have been alluded to, I think even throughout the day, but even during this panel, was making sure that as we're investing in these, how do we address the issue of equity? And even looking, and this also came from the audience, is how do we employ opportunities to address the inequities in areas that maybe we're not even researching or investigating, to ensure that we are making all the areas in Houston safe?
So when we were looking at the, kind of the parameters of if we got a sidewalk bond, and that was for 5 years, 50 million over 5 years, the 20 years was the payback. I didn't want y'all to think I only wanted to spend 50 million for 20 years. That would not be nearly enough. But we looked at some parameters, like where would we go first? What, if we took something to the voters, you know, where would we go? I mean, you'd have to look at street classifications, but one of the things is demographic demands, you know, population density, car ownership, household income, who really is dependent, you know, upon the sidewalk to get to the bus, to the business, to the whatever. You have to look at the major trip generators like schools and parks and churches and community centers. There's a whole, their layer, you know, you get those smart GIS people like Pete or planners, and they just put layer over layer over layer to get to where you really, you know, where you're really focusing in, and you're not just putting in sidewalks where, you know, they're not needed as much as they are somewhere else. So you really have to look at the data and all of the different layers to know the right place to go.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that the data is critically important. Equity is such a big blind spot for people, and the data can really help you feel grounded on exactly where the needs are the highest. The Link Houston uses a similar sort of index as to what the council member was describing in developing or identifying where what we call the Transit Equity Demand Index, or TEDI. This layers 5 different indicators, whether they be demographic, whether they're about the built environment itself, and other factors to identify which parts of town really need substantial investment in public transit and sidewalks and things like that. So look forward to our equity and transit report this year, or reference it from previous years for a look at what that looks like. But again, data alone cannot tell the whole story here. That's where the engagement strategies that we described earlier are so critical. You need to have both of those things to really get the full story, to pair the you know, rigorous data analysis with people's personal experiences.
And, you know, Peter mentioned, you know, you don't build a bridge because a lot of people are drowning in the river. We didn't build the Red Line in Houston because there were a lot of train enthusiasts. You know, we didn't build the Red Line because lots of people wanted to ride trains. We built the Red Line for different reasons, you know, for economic development, to help people get from A to B better, faster, quicker. When we think about need, whether it be bikeways or transit or sidewalks, you can look at other indicators that suggest that there's already a need for this, whether it's childhood obesity or something like that. Kids aren't getting enough exercise. Or if it's people are having a hard time getting from point A to point B because there's so much congestion, and there's also high bus ridership. Like, how can you make somebody's existing bus trip faster, for example? How can you help someone opt out of that congestion altogether? It's not about widening a road to make it, to somehow think that you could make it faster for people to drive, but what if you can give people an alternative to that pain that they deal with every day? How can you take what is the most difficult part of someone's day, their commute, and turn it into maybe the best part, but at least not the worst part of their day?
I love the reframing that you have in there. It's like taking the worst part into the best part of your day, and looking at, you know, turning it into like active transportation, but also the use of like public transit too. How do we incentivize more riders to choose things like transit?
One of the things I talked to the new Metro board chair about was the app, and they did already come out with something, one app to ride, not like 20 different apps. And so, you know, I knew where I was going today, so I didn't use it. But when I don't know where I'm going, I'm excited about, and I wasn't fully utilizing it the right way too. If somebody showed me what more it could do. So it's just making it easy. You know, you have to make it easy with the app, figure it all out. How long is it going to take? Clean bus, clean train, big part of it. I've had a really good experience. I haven't, you know, I don't feel like I've ever gotten on a train that was, or a bus that was dirty. I mean, there's not litter in the bus. I mean, that's kind of something that people that don't like the bus like to say, but I really haven't experienced any trash or leftover anything on the bus. And fast and reliable, reliable is super flexible, reliable, all those things.
I'll go back to active transportation as a habit. People need to first learn how to do it before they can personally adopt it in their lives. How can we use policy to help people adapt those sorts of habits? There's a field called transportation demand management, which focuses less on how do we widen the road to fit more people to come here, but how do we manage the traffic that we already have and shift it to other modes to fit within our existing infrastructure. So to bring this back to kids and families, I live a few blocks away from the Children's Museum, the Health Museum, and the traffic on weekends or on that Thursday when everything is free is just unreal. I have to imagine that people are spending half of their whole trip in their car rather than with their families enjoying themselves. I don't want to say all of those people should be taking transit. I know that that would seem like this imposition, but I am suggesting that next to the Red Line, next to multiple high-frequency bus routes, next to the Brays Bayou Greenway Trail and all the investments in biking that the city and the county are making, surely some of those people could try going to the museums by a different mode. And what can the city and what can those private institutions do to incentivize people to make those trips? Maybe instead of it being free for everybody, it could be free for people who are coming by an alternate mode, or some sort of other financial incentive there. Maybe there could be more experienced people who could act as sort of guides or coaches or ambassadors to doing that sorts of trying out a new type of trip that could help people get more comfortable with it. Because I know once you learn how much easier taking these alternative modes can be in certain instances, you don't turn back.
I'll take it a step further. We could eliminate parking minimums in Houston. Austin just did it. Why can't we do it in Houston? Is Evan Mintz still here? Evan Mintz just Evan wrote an op-ed in the Chronicle about this.
Yeah.
People will look at the idea of eliminating parking minimums as, oh, developers win again, but really transit wins again, or transit wins for the first time maybe. This is, I think about when my family makes a decision about how we're going to get somewhere. If there's free parking, if there's, if the transit doesn't go directly there, or even if transit does directly go there and there's, plenty of free parking available, it's attractive to drive. If there's maybe less parking, then you have an incentive to take another mode.
So then how do we convince decision makers to take this leap of faith and to move forward with some of these initiatives? That's the million-dollar question, right?
I know that 2 p.m. on a Tuesday is not most convenient for everybody, but it is what we have right now, and folks like Councilmember Alcorn are there listening. Those are policymakers that you can speak to directly about these things. To demonstrate that it's important to you, to your families, to your communities, and try and build broader public support.
I would add to that too. I think we need to show numbers. I mentioned that half of Houston wants what the anti-car activists up here want, and that doesn't make half of Houston anti-car activists. That makes half of Houston want a more multimodal future. So we need to show up in whatever ways we can. And I also think we need better messengers, maybe, than just me and Pete. The advocates are small in number, but the number of people out there who believe in this stuff, whether they be, say, the CEO of a company who is thinking about moving to Houston, or the CEO of a company who's thinking about leaving Houston because their employees want to live in a city where they can more easily get around by other modes, a city with a higher quality of life for whatever reason, and these things are interconnected. Places with unsafe streets can't have a high quality of life because crossing the street is a simple fact of life that you need to be able to do safely.
Yeah, I think also hearing from, and these groups do great work, and we rely a lot on their expertise and information, but we also need to hear from just regular old Joe Blow citizen. That's how we're at the super neighborhood meetings, we're at the civic clubs. That's really, those are who we represent. And so, you know, if you're involved in your homeowners association or civic club or super neighborhood, you know, bring up these topics. First of all, if you're not involved, get involved. And then bring up these topics with your local leaders, because that's where we go. That's where we hear from the people, and we know everybody's not coming downtown. We go in the evenings and on the weekends to these meetings, and it's not always representative of the whole neighborhood, because, you know, who has time to go to all these meetings? But go every once in a while to your civic club, or especially if you hear of somebody coming to your neighborhood, because we want to hear, you know, from the residents.
Do I have time for one more? Okay, so my final question for the panel is, we're coming into like statewide legislative session, but I think we all think about what our legislative priorities is. So if you had one priority, one thing, your magic wand that you could change or enact, what would your priority be to make things safer, especially when it comes to active transportation? Your genie wish. Anyone can go first.
Well, I want more money for sidewalks. That's what I'm saying.
I'll go back to the law around speed limits that I mentioned earlier. That's a state law that governs the streets in your neighborhood. There have been multiple attempts to change that law. The last pass in the last legislative session, like the clock just ran out, but all of the signatures and the votes and approvals were there. So it's really just a matter of time, but that law is so important.
And on the topic of speed and other things that drivers do, I would say, and this is pie in the sky maybe, but automated enforcement. We don't have speed cameras in Texas. We don't have red light cameras because both Houston voters and Governor Abbott outlawed them. I came here from New York City, where we had a speed safety camera program in school zones, and drivers who got a ticket from one of these cameras, 80% of them only got one ticket, meaning, you know, they didn't get a second ticket after they got that first ticket. These things are incredibly effective. Opponents will call them a money grab, but what they're designed to do is go broke, basically, because, you know, you put them in places where you know people speed, you catch enough people speeding, they stop speeding there, and the cameras don't pay for themselves anymore. Same thing with red light running. People, when I first moved here, people told me, hey, you know, when a light turns green, wait a second before you cross through. Yeah. And that's been really good advice. I think I'm alive today because of that advice. It's always funny when my bike signal turns green and then another car goes through, I think to myself, gee, how do they have a green light at the same time as me? You know, red light cameras also work. They have shown to have an increase in rear end crashes at the very beginning of when they're installed, but they decrease deadly T-bone crashes by a lot. There's evidence to back that up. Again, opponents will call them a money grab, but they've proven to save lives.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to this amazing panel and for their conversation today.
All right, y'all, so that concludes our day. I think a couple of really, really great, a bunch of really great conversations, both on stage and off stage, have happened. There are two themes that I personally am taking home from today. One is that it's going to take collaboration to push what it's clear that the majority of Houston area residents want, which is getting people, and kids especially, out of cars, getting them on the street so that they grow up experiencing their city, their region, and their communities on foot and on bicycle and not behind a windshield, which, as Dr. Salvo and Dr. Bob mentioned, has a myriad of positive effects for their health and well-being long-term, makes them good economic citizens in the future, and ultimately these collaborations will help us develop the infrastructure we need and get us the policies we need long-term. I think all of us are in here for the long run. The second thing that I appreciated was the importance for data for equity. And I define equity back to that triage example, which is if a child is dying in an emergency room and a child has a runny nose in an emergency, you help the child that's dying first. And the same thing's true with our city and our region. to me, that's what the word equity means. And it sounds like, and I agree with this, that we need better data. Peter and Joe are saying this, Councilwoman Alcorn. And the last thing I'll say is listening to the council member is our representatives want to hear from us. And I think if we can present good stories based on good data, based on good collaborations, and give our representatives something to work with, I think they're ready to go and they're ready to help us. But I think we just need to get to that next level. And I feel like I'm looking at, I got to meet a whole bunch of y'all, and every single conversation was incredible in terms of how much you guys are doing and how much you care about the city and the region that we live in. So please meet as many of your neighbors as you can, because you'll be shocked at how awesome all of you guys are. And the last thing I'll say is, y'all, we only get one Houston, we only get one Texas, and this is it. And we're the only ones that are going to be representing us. If we don't do it, no one will. And before you know it, we'll have fixed the traffic problem because everyone's living somewhere else. So let's make this a generational city and a generational region. I think we're the people that do it. All right, thanks, and I think there's still some coffee left.